Hello. Testing, testing. You're all here. There you all are. So welcome everybody to the Northern Powerhouse Education, Employment and Skills Summit 2022. I'm Jill Morris and I'm going to chair and be, if you're allowed to say, master or mistress of ceremonies for today's summit. This is our third summit and we've been really been through it since we started in Leeds Station. We've had the pandemic, we've had Brexit, and we now live in even more interesting times. We're absolutely delighted that we are here in home, I don't want to call it cinema, it's sort of like an arts complex. And before I sort of go any further, I just wanted to introduce you to Henry, who is the deputy at the moment. Some people will know Dave Moutry, who again is a really great champion of Manchester and the arts as well. But Henry, I just really wanted to thank you very much for your support at home, and maybe just to say a few words of welcome.
Very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Henry. I'm the very, very new Exec Director and Deputy CEO here at home. It's week 5, so this is as much a test of my induction skills as it is a welcome. We're delighted to be hosting the summit here. We are, if you haven't been to home before, we are an art centre, absolutely. We've got 5 cinema screens. This is the second biggest. We've got 2 theatre spaces. We've got a visual arts gallery. If you haven't checked it out, there's an exhibition at the moment, the Art Show, which we're doing in partnership with a host of other galleries across the city, and with this is interesting. Look at that. There we are. Incredibly loud or incredibly quiet. We've been open for 7 years. We've had 4 million visitors over that course of that 7 years. We've had 35,000 cinema screens. We've had nearly 2,000 theatre performances. And we've had, I think, 75 exhibitions, if I can remember correctly. This is the induction working. But all of that stopped, obviously, 2 and a bit years ago, and we're still trying to get back from that. And Brexit, cost of living crisis, the recruitment crisis that I'm sure everyone is feeling across the sectors, but particularly in the arts sector, technical staff, development staff, fundraising staff, front of house hospitality staff. It's just nigh on impossible to recruit for those positions at the moment, which is causing massive knock-on effects for the arts sector particularly, but across hospitality, I know. We have an amazing creative development team here. We have an amazing talent development team. So young people are at the very center of what we do and will continue to be as we go into the next, hopefully, round of Arts Council funding from next year onwards. I will hand back to Jill that in terms of housekeeping, there are no scheduled fire alarm drills or tests. So if the fire alarm does go, please do assume it's the real thing. And just make your way out of either of these exits and follow our amazing staff who will lead you to safety. And toilets are, again, just straight back through these doors. I think everyone's got the schedules, so everyone knows when there are lunch breaks, etc., etc. But I will hand you back to Jill. Thank you so much for coming to Home. And if you have a chance to, please explore the building. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Big round of applause, I think, for Henry. You're doing very well in your new job, I'm sure, and a great asset to the North. I think what we will do today is often reflect actually about very much the huge potential that we have in the Northern powerhouse, how the people in this room really need to join together and collaborate and actually demonstrate the strength of and its potential to do more. We're very lucky in the North because we have devolved power in parts, and if we are going to look at the government's meaningful devolution and the levelling up and regeneration bill promises, we can see great potential, certainly in Greater Manchester, which has been given trailblazer status. So I'm just sort of wanting to talk about how we bridge the gaps. We talked a little bit. I want to talk a lot about Brexit and the pandemic, what it means for employment, education and skills. I mean, we really are living in unprecedented times, and I know I've been saying that for the last 3 years or 4 years, and probably since before not breakfast, before Brexit too. So today we've got a really exciting program. We're looking at the state of the economy, but ultimately throughout everything, we're looking at the how do we bridge the gaps post-pandemic, post-Brexit, and actually post-ESF in terms of our prosperity. I think everybody, again, will have their own COVID or pandemic story or experience, whether you're an employer, big business, or just somebody or an employee. But we need to think about the North's opportunity, how we actually drive that talent, how we drive infrastructure and growth. We also have, of course, at the same time, a climate emergency, and we need to scale up transition to net zero by 2050 or sooner. No one knows what the impact of these crises will be on the North's education, employment, skills, and our future growth potential. But we do know that there will be gaps in the North's opportunities and potential prosperity. I think it's very interesting that we have this sort of record, record employment and record job vacancies. It's incredible. But we also know that before the pandemic, in certain sectors, and before Brexit, we knew there were potential in social care, for example, in green jobs, green skills. What kind of jobs do we need for the next generation? So my big thing really is even before the pandemic, cost of living crisis, Brexit, and all of these challenges, economic and social, these regional disparities and inequalities across the Northern powerhouse existed. So as we come out, we need to think about how we're going to deliver. And I think it's a big headache for Michael Gove. How are we going to deliver? He's already said it's going to be really tough. There's a cost of living crisis. So what we've got across the north, I think, is pockets of competition, which will be saying we want there, but also we've got a lack of connectivity. So it's really hard to get that economy driving. And I think we've got a huge debate today to do that. So I think we can all look back in maybe even next year, the year on, but I don't think at the moment we actually know what the gaps, what it means to the economy and how the productivity is low. We need to make sure that whether you are tomorrow's generation or people in this room, that we have a really good education, employment and skills and job market, which actually drives that prosperity and growth. I believe, and always have done, because I'm a proud Northerner originally. I know I don't sound like one, but you know, we can do it. We just need the power and the collaboration, working together to do that. So we need to tackle that those prevailing inequalities in the North, cities, regions, and towns. So that's enough of me on my soapbox, and you'll probably hear more of me. As I say, we've got a really extraordinary lineup. You've had Henry already, and we'll go. I mean, this particular sort of day is we're really looking in the context of the cost of living crisis, which I've talked about, is how can the North bridge those gaps in education, employment, skills left behind by the pandemic and Brexit, and level up. Now, there's somebody who's been a real stalwart, big friend, and is the deputy director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. That's Lord Jim O'Neill, a proud Mancunian and Manchester United fan, amongst other things. I can tell you more. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately for his son is getting married, and so therefore he's not with us, but he didn't want to miss this. So I'm going, and what Jim does is really just better than I do, is set the context of where we are. And as you know, he's thought-provoking. So we're really pleased that he gave us the time to give us this message. So over to Jim.
So good morning. My first task is to apologise that you are seeing me on a video and not here in person. This is one of the most important events that I like to participate in, because it relates real core human issues, especially skills and education, to both the challenges and the opportunities of the North. But I think I've got a vaguely legitimate excuse. Miraculously, our son is getting married the day after you see me doing this. Let me try and sum up my sort of views of current state of play in 6 different ways, hopefully quite briefly. So I would like to break down my comments into 6 broad areas, so I'll try to be brief as possible. The first one is the state of the world in which the North lives. Because obviously the North is not an island that is not uninfluenceable by what's going on in the rest of the world. And unfortunately, the challenges seem to never stop coming. And obviously the huge rise in food and energy prices coming as a result of the dreadful Russian invasion of Ukraine is adding to already some of the greater challenges brought about for many of society's less well-off people as a result of COVID. And so, as I think Michael Gove himself said publicly recently, that if levelling up was tough to deliver before, it's even harder now. And that is the reality. And quite how the world economy plays out the next few months is of huge uncertainty. I'm somebody that's studied it for 40 years, and I'm not quite sure which way it's going to do. But in the spirit of things I've said before, never let a crisis go to waste. And we will get the other side of whatever this crisis we're going through will end up being. Second thing in that regard, on so-called levelling up, in particular, where the North sits. I often sit around sort of trying to fathom out in my own head, how serious is this current government about levelling up? Which of course is a cousin of asking how serious was this and its predecessor governments about the Northern Powerhouse, where the phrase "landing up" hadn't even been brought in. And to some degree, I have three parts of answering that before I get into the other 4 points of substance. The first one is, I don't know, and I'm not sure they do. Second one is, because the sort of genie is out of the bottle, which started with the whole Northern Powerhouse agenda, what is it now, 8 years back? I don't think whichever government of the day can afford to put the genie back in the bottle again, because whatever it's called, and as we see with what's gone on in the complicated local politics for the past few years, people's expectations about government policy and what it can deliver have been raised. And this government, which benefits from the so-called red wall seats, has to at least try to deal with some of these issues. And in that sense, I have to say, with a possible exception of education, the much delayed white paper on levelling up was one of the more substantive things I've seen from this government. All 300 odd pages of it, if you bought for one weekend. But I think as a sort of framework for what you might do on levelling up outside of education, you know, it's kind of like the PhD thesis of what you would do. So there is focus there, and I think my last 4 points about what do we need to do and where does the North need to help itself on all this stuff. And the first thing I would always start with, you won't be surprised to hear me say, is devolution. I think the genie on devolution was opened 8 years back. And actually, surprisingly, in a way, what this white paper says about devolution is probably the most substantive I've seen for a few years from this government in its various shapes and disguises. And so for all different parts of the North that have not yet got onto the Devo journey with your elected mayor and a credible ask of trying to make your place better with more local power, I think the moment is here for you to try and get more. And I observe that we're slowly starting to get momentum on some of the things where there were roadblocks for quite a few years. And so that part I am pretty pleased about. But keep pushing. And I'll come back to touch on this because as it relates to the education space, I think a small window of opportunity has opened up. The second thing that relates to education and skills, another thing I think this government is focused on is something which I am now personally heavily involved in. Some of you probably know I became chair of a new body called Northern Gritstone, which is based around investing in startups coming out of Northern universities. And I can tell you, because of the amount of attention I get from government people about trying to make sure we can raise the money and get going, it is something that there is pretty serious intellectual interest in, which will last beyond whether it's just a government of now. And it's really important to try to create this virtuous circle of having more great ideas coming out of Northern universities, ended up with getting the right amount of money supporting it, and ultimately creating really good value-added jobs in key places around the North. Which takes me to the third thing, which is the broader virtuous circle of the interface between education, skills, jobs, opportunities. And I always personally think in this regard, COVID has already been a crisis that we shouldn't let go to waste. The whole issue of flexible working has unleashed many debates, but it's certainly unleashed this awareness that not everybody has to get on by being in the centre of London in an office every day. And it's allowing people to think more sensibly about their own personal space, how much and where they want to live, and commute more flexibly and so on. And I think this does open up all sorts of ideas for business to consider locating in other places where it might be cheaper. And it also allows employees to be more flexible. And I think this is an important thing for people in the North to think about where they can help themselves, either as employers or as mayors or as local councils, to help people get in. Let me finish with a few comments about education. I said that I thought the education white paper was, sorry, the overall levelling up white paper was pretty good, apart from education. The Department of Education has been the most centralised department that I've come across in my decade now long experience of education and Northern Powerhouse matters. And we need to use the devolution opportunity and the levelling up white paper, and crucially, the fact that the government has now identified 55 designated areas as so-called education investment areas and pushed them on two things. One is whether you can create a multi-academy trust as a local authority, and I've been led to believe that you can. So those local authorities around the north that think they understand the nature of the challenge better than the central government people in Whitehall, here is a chance that wasn't there a few months ago for you to go for what you want. And secondly, linked to many of the specific things I'm involved in, including my ongoing involvement with SHINE, Support and Help in Education, that sits in Leeds and is focused on trying to help educational attainment for the most disadvantaged. We are right in the middle of all this. And I think Steve Rotherham, who's going to be with you today, the wonderful mayor of Liverpool City Region, has got some of his people in various parts of Liverpool involved in a project with the Steve Morgan Foundation and SHINE and some others on really trying to go to tricky places and make a difference. And I think there is a possibility for us across the north to try to push the government to include these kind of initiatives as part of the devolution agenda, which will give back more responsibility and energy to all you people in the room and people that are there elsewhere that are going to help you along this exciting journey to deliver the North in all its great potential. So again, sorry I can't be with you. Thanks for including me. See you soon.
So good stuff from Jim O'Neill there, and I think the word there is really around potential. We've got the minister coming, as you know, sort of skills, Alex Burkhardt later, and Anne Longfield will be chairing that session. So the structure of the day is very much that we look at the sort of the economy, we look at the state we are in, which is there we are, and then we're going to have this panel session just now, which I'll call up people in a second, and this is really bridging the growth gap session. We've got a great lineup of leaders. One of the great leaders on this debate, and is actually really gutted that she can't be here, is Baroness Judith Blake. She's former leader of Leeds City Council, and again hosted the first NPEESS conference, which was overlooking Leeds Station. Now she's been ennobled. She's in the other place, as they call it. So just to introduce this sort of this session on the leaders panel, I'm going to again beam her in from the Whip's office in the House of Lords. So there we go.
Firstly, can I say how sorry I am not to be with you in person. It was a great privilege to address the conference the last time around. The question posed is immense, and to be fair, no one really has the answers. At least we're having the debate, the discussions, but I think with any conversations around prosperity at a local level, and of course, we know we can't just say the whole of the North is facing these problems. We know within very small communities there are huge disparities, and these are issues that we need to address. What I will say is until we get further progress on devolution, particularly around the skills agenda, we're not going to address the problems that are facing us. What we know from the growth deal, from Leeds City Region, for example, going back some years now, but when we had control of the resource and the ability to put together the local partnerships, working with young people, working with employers, working with education providers. We outperformed the national programs almost by double. These are the principles that we need to get woven into the tapestry and really get at the forefront. There are so many opportunities, greening the economy, recognizing that we just don't have the skills that we need to really achieve our full potential. But there are some serious questions about the levelling up agenda. And basically, we're going into all of the debate without actually having had a proper national evaluation in the past of what works. And I think we need to argue very, very clearly that we need to have a much greater understanding of where resource needs to be targeted, how it can be best used by local partners, and who ultimately has control over the spend at a very local level, in my view. Children and young people have suffered disproportionately as a result of COVID, as a result of all the shocks that are coming forward in the state of the economy. So there's enormous amount to be concerned about, but we have to be optimistic. And my repeated mantra about working in the North is that the North has so much to offer, so much to contribute. And if we can get the economy in the North working at full potential, then the benefit will spread across the whole country. So an enormous task ahead of us. Some very clear ideas coming through the levelling up debate. And I know that you'll focus on those today and hopefully come up with some of the answers that we need to take forward in the work to make sure the North is functioning on all cylinders and really bringing benefit to our communities. And it's that we need to keep at the forefront. This isn't just about educational programs for the sake of it. This is about delivering for our young people, for our communities, to sustain older generations as well. So incredibly important agenda, and I wish you all very well in the discussions you have today.
So yeah, thank you to Judith. I think another round of applause for her. You know, again, I think both from Jim and Judith, who for me are a great double act because they are so passionate about and champions of the North. And it's absolutely great that we do have two champions in the House of Lords for the North. We need more of them, and that voice across the North needs to really be more joined up. As Jim says, we will have Tracy Brabin, Steve Rotherham, and Andy Burnham. I've said that one, haven't I? Anyway, all three, Tracy, Steve, and Andy, looking at how we bridge the generation gap later on. So now, for our first panel, I'm going to call up Sue Ferns, who is the president of the TUC. If you come up here. And we've got Emma Degg, the Chief Executive of the Northwest Business Leaders team. We've got Professor Jim Coleman, Director of Economics at WSP. And can I just thank you personally for sponsoring and supporting the conference today, without which it would not be possible. So very big welcome to Jim, who's got a very fancy title, which is Director of Economics. So we're in good company. And of course, a very good stalwart and friend of mine, Tony Wilson, not the Tony Wilson of the place, but he is, we met a while back on this agenda when he was at the Learn and Works Institute. So we're fellow passengers on the debate, and also so he's now from the Institute of Employment Studies, and I'd say, well, he doesn't know about the labour market. You can't write that down on a postage stamp. So there we are. This is our illustrious panel. If you just bear with me, I'll just tiptoe through the tulips and come into my question time chair. So to kick off, I mean, the question that we are looking at really in this session is how far do you think, and bearing in mind what Judith and Jim have said, how far do you think that will be shared, and how far will levelling up go towards removing regional disparities and therefore regional inequalities in the towns, cities and communities across the north? Now that is a very big exam question, and you will all have your perspective, but I think, you know, just listening to Judith and Jim, that word potential keeps coming out, but we also know is how do we actually bridge that gap and deliver that growth that actually we need to do that. I'm absolutely delighted for you to kick off, Sue, because you know, again, from the trade union movement, again, we live in interesting times, and later on we'll be talking about good work and what good jobs actually look like. But just give me your thoughts and kick off on what your key ideas on the question.
Okay, thanks, Jill. I have to say I'm not as positive about the levelling up white paper as Jim was. Perhaps not surprisingly, I believe trade union movement believes that to level up Britain, you've got to level up work. And what does that mean? It means having good jobs in the right places. And I think unions have a key role to play in that, and we should be seen as partners in the process of achieving that. And I think it's not just us that think that. TUC's done some polling, and that indicates that people across Britain want more and better jobs, and that actually is the focus of the TUC demonstration that will take place this Saturday. But Jill, you talked about bridging the gap, so I want to talk about two aspects of that. First one is about addressing the inequalities that exist in the labour market, which are crucial for the levelling up agenda. And I think, you know, government has a key role to play here. We were promised an employment bill to address some of the worst aspects of the labour market at the moment. We weren't just promised it once, we were promised it over and over again, and we haven't got it. But despite that, it doesn't remove the need for action to tackle low pay, insecure jobs, and abuses like fire and rehire. And we've seen that very recently with P&O, but that is not the only example that's taking place. And we do need action to address that. And I would argue that that would disproportionately benefit workers in the north, but clearly it would benefit all working people. And Jill, you also talked about the social care sector, and that's a key issue that does need to be addressed. I think, you know, we could do with some fair work agreements in that sector. We need a real living wage, and we need decent pay rises for people, whether they're employed directly in the public sector or in actually, you know, these were key workers. We were calling them key workers. We need to treat them with respect as key workers. So pay is an important part of this, an important part of good work. It's not the only aspect of it. So all that needs to happen as quickly as possible. But we need a longer term strategy as well, don't we? To ensure that the North plays its part, contributes to future prosperity in the way that we know it can. And the only way we're going to do that is by having a proper industrial strategy. We've had industrial strategy papers from government, but I would argue that we haven't got an industrial strategy. So the TUC's put forward some specific proposals, for example, for an 85 billion investment programme in green tech, energy and transport, and TUC analysis suggests that would create 1.25 million good green unionised jobs. Investment should clearly be prioritised for regions that need it most. And if we look at the north, for example, we've got a lot of energy related industries. Some of it's renewable energy, but we've still got a lot of energy intensive jobs. And so we need to focus on that. Manufacturing jobs are an important part of this picture as well. And actually, if we don't get the right industrial strategy, we will lose out in terms of manufacturing and supply chain jobs. Particularly, for example, if you look at the net zero economy, we look at renewable energy, which we strongly support, what we don't support is the fact that so much of the materials, components, technology is being imported. We want to see more of those good green jobs being located in the north. Just transition, that's the phrase, isn't it? We talk about just transition. I'm actually quite fed up with talking about just transition. I want to make it happen. And I want to, so the workers who will be affected by the transition to net zero don't talk about just transition. They talk about their futures, the importance of a fair process of change, which might mean a bit of reskilling or upskilling and support for people to do that. And that's what we need to be doing now, not just talking about it, but actually putting it into practice. And I think, you know, you've talked about those 3 mayors, they're doing some good work, working with trade unions. We need to see that happening, all stakeholders around the table and taking that forward. So I've probably said enough by way of introduction, but I just want to emphasise that unions and the TUC should be seen as partners in this journey that we all desperately need to go on, and we want to work with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sue. And I think it's that debate around what good work actually looks like post-pandemic, because the way we work with live, rest and play has changed, as pointed out by Jim and Neil. And some of it is good. I think, you know, I quite like not coming into Manchester, I'm sorry for all these people, but, you know, on a Monday morning, and actually I'm more productive at home. We've all got our own experience, but I think it's the big thing I think that we really need to think about is that skills gap versus, you know, the huge jobs, so many job vacancies. That's the word I was replacing. So many job vacancies, but not necessarily the right pays. And I think, you know, again, how do we get business to take on board what good work is? Retention of staff is a real big issue. Getting the skills that you need to do the jobs for the next generation, or we don't actually know the kind of jobs that we will be needing to actually deliver things like the green economy. So, I mean, thanks for that sort of starter there, Sue. And I think it's really good that you've done that. I'm going to turn now to Emma, who is not quite firing on all cylinders, or just on one ear today. So from the Northwest Business Leadership Team. And Emma, again, is a huge champion of not just the Northwest, I'm going to say that, but you know, the business voice, I think, across the North and the Northern Powerhouse. So really pleased that you can be here today. But again, just give us your thoughts, Emma, on the big question.
Thank you very much, Jill. And I think I'd like to start off by saying that I agree with absolutely everything that Sue just said. But I think that's quite an important point. There is no way through any of this if employers, trade unions, government, community groups, local authorities are not working together, and we know that. And there is nothing new under the sun, actually, as Jim and I were saying before this started. Judith and I sit alongside each other on the UK 2070 Commission, and that was set up 3 years ago now. And the reason 2070 was picked was because of a recognition that if you're really going to do something transformative around fairness and equality and sharing prosperity, it is going to take that long. Now, that's not to say you don't do those immediate things too, but there is a real risk, I think, at the moment that because of Brexit, COVID, Ukraine, what's going to be coming next down the track, that we do get pulled too much into what is urgent and away from what is important. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but while in some ways everything's changed, the solutions haven't, and we know this, right? We've been around a while. It's probably why I've gone deaf in one ear, to be honest. The solutions have always been dealing with infrastructure investment alongside skills, alongside housing, alongside education, working alongside the private sector and doing that in place. We know that what we need as a business community is stable, long-term national policy with local delivery, because we know that's what works best. And there's example after example of government designing a national programme that fails completely to have recognised how that's actually going to be implemented on the ground. Right? So my comment about levelling up is that I've never been a fan of the phrase at all, because it is a clever political brand in the same way as the big society or the third way or anything else are, and they go out of fashion. We need things to be done in this parliament. We need to be feeding our children. We need to be dealing with the cost of living. We need to be helping businesses to recover properly from COVID, and Brexit is having a massive impact at the moment. But that cannot be at the expense of those long-term issues. To my shame, I went to Bradford for the first time a couple of weeks ago with Business in the Community and the NatWest Commission, and I was just incredibly struck by the quality of leadership, by the people that you met, by how the community felt. It was just, you know, sometimes you go on a visit and you just get a real buzz of pure oxygen. And it really, I have to confess, underlined for me the madness of the decisions around Northern Powerhouse Rail and our connectivity. And so for me, again, as a business community, what we are saying to government is, we want local places empowered. Yes, we want devolution, but actually we want you to recognise that just in the Northwest, we have 9,000 businesses here who export to countries outside the EU. You don't get a global Britain, you don't get a successful economy, you don't do anything unless you do that with us, and that means you sticking to your promises. Inequality is not just wrong, it is a waste of money, and it is a hindrance to business. And so thank you again, Jill, for all that you do actually year in, year out in trying to keep us to some of those long-term commitments.
Wow, that's lovely. Thank you. No, I think that word about optimism is going to keep bobbing up, really. So I'm glad that there's a consensus breaking out across the panel. But you know, thanks to the thoughts. I'm surprised you've not been to Bradford, but you know, your secret's out. No, it's great, and obviously the being the capital of culture is a great thing, and I think we should, I'm a big champion of Northern culture, which is one of the reasons we're here as well. But culture also drives the economy, and I think we see how important that is over the pandemic, where we've been deprived of a lot of that. Anyway, I'm digressing. So we've got Jim, professor as well. So I'm in awe of your what you're going to say. And again, just answer the question as well you can in terms of that prosperity gap and the economic gap that we face.
Okay, thank you, Jill. It's interesting the way the question is framed about prosperity being shared. I think it raises a question about what do we mean by prosperity. I think Sue's absolutely right. It's about your form of employment, the income you generate, having a living wage, having an income that gives you the possibility of a certain quality of life, and to be able to make choices. But it's also about how far we can progress. It's not just getting a job. We have an economy that's full of jobs. We've never had so many jobs in our economy. Lots and lots of jobs, but they're not all good jobs, or they're not all jobs which provide a progression route so that you can improve. And I think the other problem is that not all people can make choices. Some people can only make a particular choice to access a particular type of job, and it's not going to let them progress, I think. So we need to kind of understand what prosperity is. And I think the Northern Powerhouse, the North needs to prosper on its own terms and in its own way and through its own form of specialization and sharing. On levelling up, I think I agree with Emma and Sue. The problem that levelling up is trying to address is not a new problem. It's an embedded problem that we've been dealing with for decades, certainly since the 1970s, I think, when the economy deindustrialized. And we had decades of EU structural funds. I worked on all sorts of programs with EU structural funds and evaluating them and all sorts of things. So we just have a new name for the same problem. There are some differences, now in how we might be able to deal with it. And I think one is the whole agenda around net zero. The way our economy evolves will be driven in large part by how we respond to climate change and the need to achieve a net zero position by 2050. Now that creates a lot of jobs, creates the need for upskilling across many industries. It creates a need to transition, and the transition process is very important, as Sue has said. I think it's a little bit difficult at the moment because we don't know exactly what the pathway to net zero looks like. We know some things about it. We don't have maybe sufficient policy certainty in order to be able to predict and plan exactly in terms of skills development, education, etc. But we do know some of it. We know we need to retrofit all of our houses. We know that. We can work out how many jobs that's going to create. We can work out the skills needed in the next 5 to 10 years, and start quantifying that and start programming to get people into those types of roles and get people to transition across. And I know the education sector is working on that already. There's already a lot of work on progress. There are specializations in the north, whether it's offshore wind, whether it's the emerging hydrogen economy that we know will grow. We can develop more. We can face internationally competitive business and specialization on these things. But it needs to be planned, and of course it needs to be funded. I think one of the critical elements here is the role, particularly of the further education sector, which is a sector that probably trains most of the people most of the time, and is going to be absolutely fundamental to this whole process of transitioning people across industries, from industries where the jobs are maybe being removed to industries where the jobs are being created. People of all ages, from all backgrounds, all sorts of socioeconomic characteristics need to be pulled into that process. And I think it's the FE sector and the school sector that's going to do a lot of that. HE, of course, it's creating very high level skills, and it's creating all the R&D opportunities that get spun out into new businesses, of course, but the FE sector is fundamental. So I think for the North to prosper, I think all of the partners who are involved in this, all the stakeholders, need to, we all need to keep, there's work being done already, of course, but continue working on this agenda and almost speaking with one voice and creating the northern investment proposition for that. I think that's vitally important. The other thing, of course, is devolution. This is when I was working in economic development in the north of the country 25 years ago. We didn't have evolved sub-regional economies. This is also needed. It needs to go further. There needs to be more control over things like the skills agenda. Of course, I think it's also, Jim O'Neill said we need to, more areas need to benefit from this. We need to have more devolved entities across the north. I think that's correct. But we must not go into our own individual little sub-regional place and try to do this on our own. It needs to be almost systematized. The Northern Powerhouse needs to speak with one voice to government and not let government set the levelling up agenda for it. The North must dictate what the levelling up agenda is. Don't let it happen, can shape it. And of course, that's the mayors are trying to do that, but it needs to keep going, keep speaking with one voice. When I work across the world on economic development projects, the one thing I see where I see success, where prosperity is generated, where it's shared, where places become more competitive, what I also see always are municipal authorities with a lot of capacity and a lot of capability and enough people in them to do the work of generating an environment where the private sector can prosper. I think in the period of austerity, a lot of capacity was taken out of local authorities and it was never put back. It was put back into central government, but not into local government. I do a lot of work in housing, trying to get housing delivered. One of the big problems is local authorities do not have enough capability to work with the private sector to deliver housing. So unless that capacity is put back in, I think we're going to struggle with a lot of this. The other really obvious thing that I think needs to happen in the north, and has already talked about it, and others, is the connectivity piece. I think, of course, connecting the cities, connecting the towns. We know that's problematic. We know there's a lot more to do in terms of lobbying. The reality is, even if the government goes crazy today and agrees, let's have HS2 to Leeds, let's have a fast link Bradford to Manchester. I'm doing a big project in Bradford right now. And even if they said that today, it's still 10 to 15 years away. And in that 10 to 15 years, we still need to train a workforce that is capable of decarbonizing built environment, transport, heavy industry, energy. still needs to be done. We still need to work within that very constrained environment, even if the policy changes. But I think by combining resource and speaking with one voice and continuing to think really in a very strategic way across the Northern Powerhouse, I think a lot of this will be possible.
That's fantastic, Jim. I think again, I think that whole thing around transition, you mentioned Sue as well. How do you make that happen? You know, in a cost of living crisis, and there are other agendas which are part of the solution. You know, whether it's insulating your home or whatever, that we don't have the skills to do that. And businesses, I'm sure you picked this up as well, Emma, you know, that businesses are saying, well, hold on a minute, I'm not going to go as fast as I was. I'm not going to take that risk just now. I was going to make my business net zero. I'm going to do that. But there's this sort of, and for individuals, it's the supply chain and other things that are making things not accelerate, but actually sort of slow down. Emma, you're sort of maybe not. I mean, I think there's a huge commitment, but I think it's that whole thing of how do you actually get that acceleration and scaling up that's needed to make that transition and make it affordable. Yeah, I'm just going to quickly do that.
I think it's complicated. I think there's an opportunity. The energy pricing at the moment is a huge threat. There is also an opportunity. Actually, part of transition is becoming more efficient. Is about becoming more efficient, right? So I think it's complex, and businesses are many and varied, and you know, are not a homogeneous mass really. So I think it's about the language that we use sometimes to persuade businesses to engage in that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work to do there. I also think the word capacity that you use, Jim, is really an important one when we think about anything. And you know, we do have to. I mean, I've just been talking about Brexit and pandemic, but you're right. You know, don't forget the period of austerity. And when you're listening to Eddie from the RMT this morning, you know, he's talking about, you know, this whole situation where people, you know, haven't had a pay increase and all of those things. But I don't want to get into the RMT structure at all, because but the point being is that people haven't had have felt that things have been taken away from them. And then at the same time, we've got a government saying, oh yeah, but we're going to put this all back in. And then we also actually sort of feel that there's going to be probably little pockets of success. And we saw that with the integrated rail plan as well, because certain places did get, we didn't get, the North didn't get the big plan. And as you say, when we started tomorrow, it's not, we're behind the curve, we're not leading the curve. And at the same time, we've got this huge potential to really drive certainly the net zero agenda with great ambitions as well there. So I'm now going to just, I think I'm getting quite excited because I think we've got lots of things going on, but I'm going to go to you, Tony, now, because I know I call you a bit of a guru, but so don't let me down. The point being that what I want you to do is really sort of like absorb some of that, be a bit thought-provoking, but also do that thing where you talk about, you know, where the gaps are in the labour market.
I will try. I'll try not to let you down, Jill. Thanks for having me. And it's great. It's great that we're all back together. It feels like, I mean, it has been too long, so it's good to see friends and familiar faces again too. I mean, what struck me listening to Sue, to Emma, and to Jim is these sorts of challenges and the issues, the opportunities too, but the challenges and the issues we've been talking about around, you know, how do we make work better? How do we reduce inequalities in the labour market? How do we support good growth? How do we improve opportunities for progression? How do we collaborate and work better? How do we invest in building capacity and capability in areas? Quite apart from the Jim O'Neill agenda, I totally agree with what Jim was saying, but the big kind of, you know, power broking in central government, how do we actually do these things locally? These are the issues that you have been grappling with for years. Like, you know, these are the last couple of years has changed a lot. It's catalyzed and it's accelerated changes. These are fundamentally the same sorts of problems we were facing 2, 3 and more years ago. And I think what worries me a bit is that where the government investment has gone over the last couple of years has been prepared for a very different crisis, a crisis that we haven't had. Like 2 years ago, if we were speaking 2 years ago, we were still in a full lockdown. We were on the cusp of what we thought would be 4 million people unemployed. Unemployment that we had not seen, ravaging communities we hadn't seen since the 1980s. And right now we would be dealing with a crisis of long-term unemployment. How do we help those people who lost their jobs then get back to work? The crises we're seeing now, actually, thankfully, we avoided that. Yes, because of the job retention scheme, investment, but also because of all the work of people in this room and in rooms and in organisations like that across the country, and employers and families and households adapting and changing and trying to sort of work through it and navigate through it. You've got the lowest unemployment now, more or less, since the 70s. So I think the three, I mean, I'll be really brief, but the three challenges I think we're facing now are sort of 3 Ps around participation, they're around pay, they're around productivity. And they're same but different to where we were a few years ago. Participation is one that is the biggest difference. You know, there's about 1 million, we think there's 1 million people missing from the labour force compared to the pre-pandemic trend. We have reversed a long run growth in the labour force that's gone back to the 1990s, and it's reversed partly because of population and Brexit and so on, but mainly, overwhelmingly, because of higher economic inactivity, horrible phrase, higher economic inactivity, people not in work and not looking for work. Predominantly older people who've left the labour force, they've retired, drawing down job retention scheme, income support, self-employed income support, pension savings, redundancy payments and so on, many of whom won't come back, but also significant growth in long-term ill health, worklessness due to long-term ill health. Some of that may be long COVID. I think actually probably most of it is people with pre-existing conditions waiting for treatment, or whose mental health has got worse, or who are worried about going back to work, or who employers have let go because of the pandemic. So that participation crisis is affecting all of us. I'll come back to how it's affecting us in the north, sort of far worse. On pay, you know, this is a story of inflation. Like, you know, with inflation rising beyond 10% in the next few months, pay will never keep up. You know, we will not be able to counteract the hit to our living standards through pay alone. But at the same time, it doesn't need to be as bad as it is. You know, it was the largest falls in real terms pay that we've seen at least 2 decades in the data that was released 2 days ago. The third problem then around productivity is linked to the one about pay, actually, because behind that inflation story, nominal pay growth, cash terms pay growth, is rising by about 4% year on year. Now, that's pretty high by historic standards. It's great. It's great if you've got a growing economy and you've got rising productivity. We don't. You know, we've got a flat economy and we've got weak productivity growth. And what the bank and the Treasury and everyone else is worried about is you've got 4% nominal pay growth, 1.5% productivity growth, 0% economic growth. You know, that suggests higher prices, that suggests inflationary spirals and so on. So, you know, that's the wage price spiral the bank's worried about. It's not one about industrial action, although I'm sure they're worried about that too. It's mainly one about people moving jobs, better pay, firms having to offer more, and not finding those gains in productivity. I think in the north, this is affecting us. You know, we've done work around this tight labour market, and for the local government association, some of these differences across the country. You know, for all the places where there's more vacancies and unemployed, there's plenty of places where that isn't the case. And the places where we still have low participation, we still have high unemployment, we still have weak vacancies are the same areas before the pandemic. They're ex-industrial areas, they're often coastal areas, they're inner city areas, and they're often, more often than not, in the northern part of the country rather than sort of southern and southeast country. So, you know, here in Manchester or in Leeds or in Newcastle, there's more vacancies than there are unemployed people, often significantly more. But you go to Oldham, you go to Bradford, you go to north of Tyne, North Tyneside, you've got 3 or 4 in each of those places, 3 or 4 unemployed people chasing every vacancy. You know, so how do we address that? It's about transport, absolutely. It's about skills. It's about how we can better help people access those jobs. But these are really fundamental problems that we're facing. This is not always a pretty picture about a growing economy, and well, it's not a growing economy, but about a tight labour market and higher vacancies. There's a lot more we can do. Now, I'm an optimist at heart, I really am honest. So I would just say, I think there are things we can be like optimistic about. And I think largely it comes down to kind of appetite and desire to do something about this. I mean, the social, what I think we have all felt is a social and economic case to reduce inequality. I won't use the term levelling up either. To reduce inequalities, to narrow gaps, to support growth. That's a business case now. It's a stronger business case, a stronger business imperative than it's ever been. And it's just great hearing Emma and hearing others, hearing business leaders up and down the country saying, what can we do? We want to do more. Jim mentioned it too. Jim O mentioned it too. Those are the benefits of flexible working, more inclusive recruitment, more job security, These are things that employers are investing in. I'm not going to be Panglossian, it's not happening in all parts of the economy, but these are things that employers are trying to do more of, and we can work better with employers. We must work better with employers to try to help them do that, think differently about how they recruit, how they support people in work, how they support economic growth, and how we support economic and social inclusion. But the other point is, I think that, with the powers that we've got, the increasing powers that we've got locally, and the appetite locally to do more, I think there are opportunities for us to work better together, whether that's through a big adult education budget, devolved AEB, whether that's through city deals and gain share arrangements, whether that's through local partnerships. There's more we can do. And the final point is, this is more for central government. The money's there. That unemployment crisis we prepared for, £10 billion. Government committed through the Plan for Jobs and the Spending Review in active labour market policies and skills support to tackle unemployment. At least £2 billion of that money has gone back to Treasury because unemployment's been lower. Well, as I was saying to Treasury just this morning before I came here, can we have that back, please? Can we spend some of the money that wasn't spent on Kickstart, on Restart, in Job Centre Plus? Imagine if we had £2 billion we could invest in support for people with health conditions, for older people, for people outside the labour force who aren't currently looking for work. I'm not talking about telling people to come to job centres and look for a job. I'm talking about going where the people are and saying, we'll help you, so we'll improve your well-being, try to tackle loneliness, try to help you to take part again. And while we're talking about that, we talk about what jobs might be available, what help might, how we can help you to start to take steps back to work. And of course, support employers and invest in the skills and support people need to work. There's massive opportunities here too, but challenge. Wow, a lot of challenges. A tough time to be out of work. I still think, and it's a tough time for many of us in work as well. With the cost of living crisis that we're all facing. Ends on a bad note. I meant to end on a happy note. I'm sorry.
No, I'm quite happy now because I think we should have a campaign to get the money back. Yeah, well, we could do that. Coined at the Northern Powerhouse Education Employment Skills Summit 2022. Very interesting. I told you it was good, and really thought-provoking stuff. I think, Emma, I think you were going to come back there because on some of that.
Yeah, Tony, can you be my guru as well, please? That would be lovely. Good luck getting any money back out of the Treasury. Yeah, we've been trying and failing around the apprenticeship level for some time, really. So there were two things for me, really. The first is we shouldn't just be arguing this on the basis of unemployment again and social justice. We should be arguing this on the basis of this is now hampering growth. Yeah. The number one topic on all of my members, and they're the big employers across every sector, across pretty much every category, is labour shortages. Yeah, you're quite right that is patchy, but this is actually going to hinder the recovery, and that's the reason to keep the money there actually. And employers want to do that. And the only other alternative is something around immigration policy. Well, if you don't want to do that, you're going to have to fund as doing it for people who are furthest away from the labour market. The other thing I just wanted to say very quickly is about net zero skills, and it's because of a captive audience of skills people here. And I can see Nick Goldspink here from N8, who's one of the people who's working with us on this. I think it's really important that we don't end up with this idea that we don't know what those jobs are, because we do know what quite a lot of them are actually. And we do know what the skills are, and there's a fundamental translation problem between employers and the skills system. Because you say to us, what green skills do you need over the next 20 years? And we say, we don't know. Actually, we do. We just talk in the wrong language. We need the same skills as before, but we need every employee to have an understanding around sustainability, around the green economy, around having the right moral compass and those things. So some of that we can do now without anything from government, and we can do that in place and be educating those people and giving aspiration to our kids about those jobs are already there.
Yeah. Jim, just quickly, I'm going to go back to Sue, and then we're going to open it up because I want to hear from you as well. But I mean, just in terms of the 3 Ps, and also what Emma said, it's like, what's I think so frustrating is that we sort of know what needs to be done, as Emma sort of saying, but there's this gap and the language. I think it's really important moving forward, because I think that going back to that thing, we do need to be saying that we do have potential's got to be an opportunity. Potential's got to actually be realised. And I think, you know, that's not the state we are in at the moment. There's a lot. Yeah, no, I sort of
No,
gone.
no, I think there's a lot in that. I think I agree with everything that Tony was saying. I think one of the problems we have sometimes is that you know, I'm an employer, WSP is an employer, and we're saying to the education sector, you're not giving us the young people with all the skills that we need. And the education sector saying to us, you're not telling us what young people you want us to produce for you. So we get this slight kind of impasse sometimes, which is partly a communication thing. It's partly just having kind of more and better dialogue. I think addressing the skills needs of net zero is impossible without really close collaboration between employers and skills and training providers. On the participation point, I think one of the mistakes we should not repeat is an assumption that if the economy improves, things pick up, lots of jobs are created through decarbonisation and net zero, everybody will get picked up and pulled along with it, because as Tony said, we've got embedded inactivity and lack of participation in the same areas that we've always had it. And one thing I always say is that the easiest way to get a job is to already have a job.
Yeah.
You'll get another job. If you haven't had a job ever,
The access level.
yeah, or you've been inactive for a long time, it's extremely important. And where I've worked on programs which are about participation and activity, to some extent, the only way around it is very, very resource intensive, working in communities and helping people access the labour market. We're going to have a lot of issues, I think, about the just transition, which is getting people who are maybe older in their careers, more progressed in their careers, maybe they've been inactive a long time, to go into new types of jobs, new types of industries which have not been there before. So that it's not just getting people into the labour market, it's getting them into a kind of working experience that is quite new for everyone, I think. And it might be hybrid, it might not, it might be about a decarbonisation skill, it might not, but there's a lot in that, I think. And that it would be great to get some of that 10 million, because I think we need it for quite resource intensive working communities. I think because we don't do that, people don't just naturally get picked up.
You really got to drive it right down to those pockets or areas which are, you know, where the disparities are so obvious. Sue, come on in. What's your take?
I want to make 3 quick points if I can. In terms of opportunities, you look at the sectors we're talking about, particularly in terms of net zero and the demand for skills, there is a huge opportunity to diversify that workforce. We are still, for a large part, talking about white male workforces. Those aren't our communities, and there's a huge opportunity to diversify. Everybody talks about it, but where's the real plan and drive to make that happen? I think huge opportunity, but we all need to really get behind that. Secondly, in terms of green skills, I think it's really difficult to talk about green skills. I think we have to unpack that, because in some cases it's new jobs, green jobs, contributing directly to net zero. There's a lot more where people are doing work in a certain way and could do it greener in the future. So I think we've really got to unpack that. And I would say green does not necessarily equal good jobs. It should do, and we should all work to make that the case. But don't assume that green and good work, good skills, good jobs are necessarily interchangeable. That needs some real effort to make sure that these are good quality jobs. And finally, just to agree with your point, we need to do this now. So we need to think about people and the skills of people coming into the labour market. But we also need to think urgently about those who are already in the labour market. And actually, I think in some cases, speaking from the experience in my own union, some of the barriers to transition are not as great as people perceive them to be. And we need to help people with that. And actually, sometimes I think employers could do a bit more just by thinking about the way that they describe jobs and skills. Sometimes I know from my members, they look at job specs and they think they haven't got the skills, but it's the way that everybody uses language. So, you know, there's, I think, some relatively straightforward things that we could do, you know, not a silver bullet, but that could help as well.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think what we need to do now is listen to, on the point around participation, I want some audience participation, and just to refresh people, we will be looking at good work later on, and also the green skills agenda. So the whole thing of education, the next session is very much on education and skills. So I know somebody's looking for a question. Oh, there we are. So come on. So I am going to go. The person who was first, which is the man here, with the glasses on his head. They're not mine, are they? It's fine.
I can speak loudly anyway. So, morning. I'm Richard Bonner. I'm a director of Arcadis in the organisation to WSP, but I'm also part of the Northern Powerhouse board. And I'm really interested in a whole series of points that I think are interwoven. The issue of immigration that we're talking about is really interesting, because there's very high levels of immigration in the world of science, innovation and technology, but we have lost that usual immigration post-Brexit in the sense of low-skilled economy workers. The issue of transition on productivity, I think, is how we can link some of those ambitions by trying to invest in standardization and automation in jobs that already exist, but where we can drive some of that routine activity so that we are taking some of that low-skilled effort out of the economy. There we are, we're back in. Thank you.
We did hear you, by the way. But, yeah.
try and speak loudly. And so linking those issues up, to your point, Sue, around an industrial strategy, I wonder how joined up we are actually on the whole journey to changing the way industry works. And an example, I was chatting to an organisation recently, is about vertical farming. We're reading in the papers around so much produce being left in the fields, but actually can we automate quickly? And I wonder how the panel feel about joining up those big constructs around the whole transition on automation to improve productivity, the skills agenda, and how we accelerate our industrial strategy to more clearly give us the routes to getting the outcomes we need from the skills that are available.
Okay, and I think I might just take three, because and I know the lady next to you is there, so we might on productivity levels. I think you should go there. Yeah.
So I'm Anne Gornell. I'm co-chair of the Northern Skills Network. Hello, everybody. And the Northern Skills Network has approximately 300 training providers of all kinds included in it. So my question is to Professor Coleman. It was it was great to hear recognition of the FE sector and the role it could play. It does play a role currently, but could be put into pole position, I think. How do you think that could happen, and what would be the impact of realising that potential?
Okay, and can I have one more question? Oh, well, all right. Is it? I hope it's not the same question.
It's not the same.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, all that that row has been done now. Okay.
Hi, yeah, I'm Alex Miles. I'm the Managing Director of Yorkshire Learning Providers and the other co-chair of the Northern Skills Network. Again, just want to say great to hear Professor Coleman acknowledge the FE sector. The FE sector doesn't get acknowledged as being critical in a lot of instances, more of a mop-up sector, so that's great. What I would like to ask the panel is twofold. One, I would have liked to have heard more about how apprenticeships can play a part in promoting levelling up, or particularly social mobility. Today is Social Mobility Awareness Day, so I'd like to get the panel's thoughts on how you think apprenticeships can really be critical ally to the question and social mobility and levelling up for towns, cities and communities. I don't think that they've got the accolade that they deserve, and I think that's more that we all need to do across the north and within our towns, cities and communities. And then the other part is on the green skills. I'm currently champion green and sustainable development within apprenticeships, and how we can use apprentices to be the key driver in supporting employers in their green and digitisation strategy. Again, your thoughts on how we can use apprenticeships to drive that forward. But also, Emma, I'm hosting a Northern Green and Sustainable Development Conference in September. So it's a bit of a, can you come along and talk about the wonderful things you just said about, because the challenge I'm getting is if the FE sector doesn't deliver in retrofit or EV or and there's hot underground source pumps, whatever they're called, they don't necessarily respond. And what I'm trying to say is we need to have this conversation now. We can't wait for government. We can't wait for funding. And actually green sits in every sector and every type of business. So that you really hit home on that. So if you can come and be a guest speaker, I'll come.
We are going to talk a lot about skills and education in the next bit, but that you had, I think it's a couple of questions. I think the immigration one, maybe I'm looking at you, Emma, maybe to answer, but do chip in, all of you. I'm going to take those through because I'm conscious of the time. And I know there's lots more we can talk about, but let's just come back on the immigration, then we'll go. You had a dedicated question, so you'll have to try and answer that one. And I think actually with Tony and Sue, they're all really good questions. So well done, whichever row that is. Yeah. Okay,
really
Emma.
quick then, bullet points, and yes, if I can. Richard's point around tech, absolutely. But we can integrate that with just transition as well. So just a really quick example, and it relates to the apprenticeship point too. So a project called Glass Futures, brilliant around transforming the foundation industries, got made smarter at the heart of that as well. And it's working along with an organisation that we helped to establish called Net Zero Northwest. Yeah. Foundation industries that move to better technical adoption, better monitoring, are more efficient, save energy costs, digitize, but also can upskill existing operatives who've been doing dirty, boring, repetitive jobs to actually do that monitoring and actually have the associated pay rises. And we've got really good examples of that, but it needs that really tight working in place. And the other very quick one, which again is a bit of an advert that I promised, we have all sorts of issues in terms of skills shortages. One is around really high skilled R&D postgrads that we used to be getting in much larger numbers from Europe. There's a brilliant project called Prosper that's being run out of Liverpool, Manchester, Lancaster, and is about to spread across the north and across the rest of the UK. And that's alternative routes into employment other than going into academia and having tenure and so on. So, but again, that's about local design. So we can do it, and none of those things need government permission to do it, or further devolution. If, Jim's point, if we get the relationships right, we can make a real difference.
Great. Jim.
Well, that's an exam question I've got to answer. So what did we do here? I think more money helps, of course. I think the sector's underfunded, but let's come back to that. I think what I think might be a little bit missing at the moment is what I don't see prominently enough at central government level is a single cohesive voice of the FE sector telling government that our sector is going to train all those people who need to fit heat pumps. They will not be educated by Oxford and Cambridge. They will be educated by Keighley College, which I happen to be going to tomorrow, which is why I use that one. But this is the reality. It's these institutions that will train the heat pump installers or get people who are currently fitting gas boilers to transition, this whole transition thing. And I don't think that voice is clear enough or articulated strongly enough to central government. Central government hears from universities all the time, and so it should, but it's not hearing this kind of single voice from that sector. And I think that's part of the answer. And I think it's also part of the answer about how to get more funding into the sector, I think. So there's a kind of maybe a strategic articulation of the role, this key role, this fundamental role. I think you mentioned apprenticeships. I think apprenticeships are part of the answer. And I don't think most employers don't understand, for example, how degree level apprenticeships work, or the fact that they're paying for them already and can benefit from them. And it's again, this is not. There's a whole parity with steam problem that we've never solved as well. Germany doesn't have that problem, which is why Germany is still, despite a few problems, a manufacturing powerhouse. So I think there's more to do in terms of thinking strategically about how we place the apprenticeship as a core part of this whole effort to decarbonize our economy and the role that the FE sector will play, and to make that message strong and just would keep repeating it until the government gives up and says, okay, here's the money, here's part of that 10 million that we're going to spend. I think it's sometimes kind of quite straightforward things like that everybody forget, because everybody's so tied up in the day-to-day. Because of the pressures of the day-to-day, there's not, again, it's capacity, having enough capacity to stand above that and articulate.
And I think it also comes back to this point around the sort of the capacity that we have locally to do this. And when we were talking about that earlier, I think you may have been mentioning it, Emma. I had in mind like Cleveland in the US, which has had incredible transformation from being a very industrial area in decline to one that's really on the leading edge now with growth and a very livable city, and so much that they've done well. But at the heart of it is really, really strong local partnerships, municipal capacity and capability, the right sorts of devolution. It's not the kind of the big power broker stuff. It's about having the operational autonomy to join things up. And it links back to the FE point, because I think I feel like that sector, a lot of policy in that space has been characterized by constant change in policy and direction, real insecurity in the sector too, and the points that Jim's made around esteem and parity of esteem and so on. And I worry that we are still making lots and lots of changes to policy. We're still not really settled on what it is that we actually want to do and how we can have a more coherent, more systematic approach. And I worry that so I think on apprenticeships, there are really practical things we can do, particularly around getting large employers to give their levy money away, to try and use that, as many are now doing, a number are now doing, and to try to extend that access to training to more people. There's more we can do around working better with smaller employers. There's a lot more that local areas, city regions in particular, are doing around trying to take the lead on that and really grab it. And that's fantastic. And I think we will be talking more about that later today. So there's clearly a lot we can do, but I do worry we've got a bit of a Model T board problem around adult skills, where you can have any training you want if you're an employer, as long as it's an apprenticeship. And for a lot of employers right now, they will not commit to creating 1 year or 2 year jobs with training and commit to the off-the-job requirements of apprenticeships. So we've got to also think about how can we make training, access to training, more flexible, more responsive, recognize that there are risks of unintended consequences of firms substituting training they may have done for government funded or co-funded training, but also recognize the reality that investment in training is plummeting. And we really, really need to invest in this to help to support those transitions into work. And they're really doable. As Sue said, people do move jobs all the time. And as the labour market tightens, firms will recognise that and they'll change their recruitment practices. And this partly comes back to the productivity point too. How do we sort of square some of that circle? My concern there is that we don't talk well enough to firms. It's not really for government to tell firms how to run their businesses better, but we don't invest enough in supporting firms to do the things that would drive those sorts of improvements. And we don't talk to workers who are in work about how to find a better job. Those are fundamental system failures. Our public employment service is a claimant conditionality service for about 1 million people who are claiming the right bit of universal credit. And on the business side, I'd say now, help to grow management and LEP growth hubs and help to grow digital with the best will in the world are not going to lead to the transformation in business management practices that we need. So we do have to start thinking more creatively about how we can bring that together, work much better with firms on recruitment and retention and support in work, and much better with people in work around how to find a better job.
Yeah, and finally, Sue, sorry.
So, all the experts have said lots of things which I agree with. So just a couple of points on apprenticeships. I think they do have an important role to play as part of a broader system. I think we mustn't, it's all about quality, the quality of training that's provided, whether it's an apprenticeship or not. Let's not confuse quality with level. We need high quality at every level, and that's really important. I agree with you, digitisation becomes more important. Again, I think that's an opportunity to diversify our apprenticeship intake. And I wish government would do more about that in terms of setting some targets or expectations around that. In terms of the point about the broader industrial revolution, if you like, automation and so on, I think it's right. We shouldn't talk about net zero and green skills as something separate from that broader change that's happening. But again, it's about how we manage that. There are different views about whether automation is going to lead to job losses or job gains. Who will lose? Who will gain from that? How do we govern that? What's the use of algorithms? The implications of how algorithms are set up. But I agree with you, it's all part of a wider debate that we all need to be part of.
And on that note, we're going to carry on debating. We've got an excellent session. We've got the minister coming to tell us exactly on that point around skills. So get your questions ready. I'm absolutely delighted that
Can we have our 10 minutes?
2 billion, it's 2 billion. 2 billion is the figure.
we want it
One of
now.
them.
Who's going to answer that question? Hey, come on. So we've got Anne Longfield, who's the Commissioner on Young Lives and former Children's Commissioner for England. We're very much looking at bridging the gaps in education specifically, but the employment and skills that we've been talking to. So the debate goes on. I'm going to give you a toilet break, a very quick one, because we need to get cracking. I think it only really remains to thank our exceptional panel and to Judith and Jim in absentia, and to put your hands together and say, haven't they been great? I think they've been wonderful. So thanks very much. Oh, and you've got to be back here at 11:40. So it is a very quick break. So we're going to have a quick cup of tea. Yeah.
Pretty much sold out. Keep sitting here. I don't know if you accepted this music, but
I'm a high level.
sorry, there's a cup there as well. Somebody left the cup. So it's a bit safe.
It's very plain. Back in the same spot. Yeah. I can get my point. Well,
Welcome back. I told you that was a very quick break, and we're here. We've got a really exciting session to build on the last one, and I just really want to introduce the mighty Anne Longfield, who is all kinds of things, but she was excellent children's commissioner, and also conducted the commission on young lives, and really pleased that you're here to not only wearing your Northern Powerhouse hat, but to also run this session. And I'll also welcome Alex for over to you.
Well, that was an intro. So I'm just a minute warm up before we've got the minutes to speak. And I've been working with a lot of people in different organizations across the North for now probably about 4 or 5 years since I published a report which looked at growing up in the North, and a lot of the things that I saw were shocking even to me that, live here, in terms of disparities between North and South. We've had the pandemic since then, and we've got the changing world of work, labour shortages, new forms of work and the like, all challenges. And we've got levelling up, which we, whatever we call it, I want us to embrace and make happen, because actually those young people need us, whatever we want to call it, to make those differences and make those changes work. So a tough brief there, but we've got no better person here to speak to us. Alex Burkhart is the Minister of Apprentices and Skills. I've worked with him for many years and been really pleased to do so, and really great to have this opportunity to be in the same room today. We're going to have some questions afterwards, but just a few, because he's on a tight time.
Brilliant. Look, thank you so much for that introduction. And yeah, for those of you who don't know, me and Anne used to work together when she was the Children's Commissioner, and I can confirm she is all sorts of things. All of them good. It's wonderful to be here in Manchester today. Thank you very much for inviting me. Every time I come to Manchester, you can't help but feel sort of tangible sense of drive. You feel it in the conversations that you have with people, in the dynamism of the institutions, and also in the construction. Just every time I come, there are new, enormous and exciting buildings being hauled out of the ground. This is a place where things are happening. And I must warn you, I'm sort of prone to long historical digressions, because I used to be a history teacher. Part of me that's never been reprogrammed. But yeah, the first mention of Manchester in the historical record is from about 920, when Alfred the Great's son, Edward the Elder, sent an army to Manchester to refortify the Roman fort and re-establish the town as part of the fight back against the Vikings. And it was those towns, those fortifications that were made at the beginning of the 10th century, which became the centers of trade, became the centers of education, became the centers of skills. And so right from the start, Manchester has been involved in the birth of our national story, but in the life of our national story, in bringing together those elements of skills, of trade, and of stability. And today, we see it all over again in the partnerships that are being formed between the MCA, between the Department for Education and government more widely, and also through all of the FE colleges and all of the wonderful independent providers of skills that we have in the city. And never before, I think, in my life, has there been a time in our country when there has been such a hunger for skills. Huge numbers of vacancies opening up in the economy, huge numbers of opportunities for people of all ages and stages, if they have the means to take advantage of those chances. And I want to tell you this morning about some of the things that we're doing in DFE to help more people be able to take advantage of those chances, and also how that work is tying in with the work that's happening, not just here in Manchester, but all across the north and all across the regions of England. One of the things that is absolutely central to the work that myself and Nadeem Zahawi are doing at the moment is to try and create a skills system in which the voice of the employer is more clearly heard. What we're trying to do is make sure that we have qualifications that have been designed with employers that will give students the skills the economy needs. We're doing that at level 3, equivalent of A level, the new T levels that we've been devising with employers that give students not only the most up-to-date skills, but also give them 45 days working on a job in the workplace as part of that program. For years, employers have said that there are too many students leaving technical education without experience of the workplace, without job-ready on-the-job experience. We are starting to tackle that. But we're also looking again at technical qualifications level 2, the GCSE equivalent, to make sure that they all lead towards jobs and that they are all up to speed with the latest innovations that are taking place in the workplace. Obviously, the skills agenda goes way beyond 16 to 19, and that the vast majority of our workforce, our 2030 workforce, has already left formal education. And we need to make sure that all of those people who want to skill up and need to skill up have the opportunity to be able to do so. And because of that, 2 years ago, the Prime Minister announced his free courses for jobs initiative, meaning that anyone who didn't get an A-level equivalent when they were in formal education can at any time go back and get a technical qualification at that level for free. We have the Chancellor's project Multiply to make sure those adults with low numeracy will be able to get tuition to get that basic skill, which we know is one of the great drivers of higher wages. And we also have a project I'm extremely excited about at the moment, our skills boot camps, 12 to 16 week courses that help people skill up, often change career, perhaps coming out of a period of unemployment, or coming back to work, having had a period off to have children or have caring responsibilities, a chance to get a quick step up into a new job and take advantage of opportunities that are emerging in the jobs market. And then in a couple of years' time, we will have the lifelong loan entitlement, giving everybody the opportunity to take out a loan to study technical qualifications at levels 4 and 5. We know that this is one of the big gaps in our skills economy relative to other mature economies. And, it's going to be a great chance for people to switch careers, but also progress faster in the careers they've chosen. And all of this runs alongside the work that we are doing with local areas, obviously with local devolved administrations, but also with local groups of employers, because we don't just need to make sure that the qualifications and the courses we're offering are giving people the right skills. We need to make sure that those courses are available. And so the local skills improvement plans, which will hopefully by this time next year exist across the country, will set the skills priorities for areas so that colleges and independent training providers and the like know what courses employers are asking for. And that, when you plug it all together, gives students and prospective students more confidence that the course they're doing is going to lead to the job they want. It gives employers more confidence that the courses that are being provided are going to give them the skills they want. It gives us the opportunity to grow prosperity in all parts of our country. And the first visit I went on as a minister is strangely pertinent to my visit today, because it was to Salford Media City. And in Salford, I saw one of our digital skills boot camps. And these were groups of people, range of backgrounds, range of stages in life, doing an intensive course in cybersecurity in Salford Media City. And then when they graduated from that, many of them were going on to do apprenticeships in Salford Media City and going on to get jobs in Salford Media City. And so we saw this fantastic matchup between the needs of the individual, the needs of business, and the provision of skills. And what I got to watch, you've got to meet the people, local people who were benefiting from a massive local success story, and adding, getting the opportunity to get new jobs themselves, but also adding to the prosperity of their city, and so creating more opportunities for people to come. Similarly, a few weeks ago, I was privileged enough to be part of a meeting in DFE where we had a delegation come to see us from Teesside. And Redcar and Cleveland have brilliantly formed a partnership with BP. BP are going to set up a massive new state-of-the-art hydrogen plant in Freeport, Freeport that the government has been able to create on Teesside. So the local council has found the land, the government has created the Freeport, and BP have brought this great new green technology, which is going to employ thousands of people. And they are working with the local colleges to make sure that local young people and local people changing career are going to get the skills to work in that hydrogen plant. And that is, again, a wonderful example of how, when we all work in partnership, where everybody, every part of the system, local and national, works together, we can give local people new opportunities to drive forward prosperity in their cities. People, place, and prosperity. This for me is the very essence of levelling up. And for me, it's skills that tie it all together. Thank you very much for listening. I'm very happy to take some questions now.
Great stuff. Well, thank you for that, Alex. I know you've not got long. Can we do a quick sweep of questions? Is that all right if we do two?
Yes, and you're in charge.
No, actually, you're you're opposite in charge of that. Okay, we're going to do these three. Let's go for these three first. This lady here, gentleman there, and this lady here. But can we have them really brief because we're really against time.
Hi, I don't know if this is working. I see
It is.
you can hear me. Good. So my name's Jane. I work for Child Poverty Action Group on a project which is looking to help potential second earners back into employment. It's very much based on the statistic that for low income families, they require 1.5 salaries, 1.5 wages in order not to be living in poverty. So we're looking at supporting in practical terms and looking at exploring what the barriers are for those potential second earners. We've been rolling this out in Bury for a year now. And one of the big barriers that we've found is training for people that have been out of the workforce. And it's not just the training being available, it's actually the childcare. It's the barriers that people have in their homes and in their work and in their families to access that training. So where the will is there, and a lot of the mostly mums, some dads that I've been supporting are wanting to go back into work, they're wanting to upskill, they just are not able to because they cannot access the training because they can't fund the childcare. Is that something that you could address?
Yeah, no, look, that sounds like really important research and work, and very much the sort of thing we're interested in. And my colleague Will Quince is at the moment looking at childcare from a whole series of perspectives as part of the response to cost of living issues. And I'll certainly pass on the work that you're doing, but I know that he's very alive to making sure that absence of childcare isn't a blockage to people skilling up or going back into work. So he'd be interested to see that, I'm sure.
Yeah. I think that the link between training and employment and childcare at one point it was very strong. And as more childcare has become available, that's kind of moved on, but it remains in terms of return to work. I think this lady here.
Hi, Minister. Thank you for this. About 62% of people living in the north of England are living in an area with a mayoral combined authority. I was wondering what your assessment has been on the skills devolution that we've had thus far.
So I think skills devolution is obviously a very important part of the future of devolution settlements and skills provision. And I think that the sort of the world we're moving into is going to be one where there are sort of two major players with a number of intermediaries. Obviously, MCAs, great work that they're doing with adults in order to get them into work, but then the work that DFE is doing through obviously through the intermediary FE colleges, but also new initiatives that we're trying to get off the ground. And I think over time there will be conversations about whether those new initiatives get devolved down once we've established proof of model. Then I think those MCAs that are performing well on skills would obviously want to talk to us about whether they take some of those things on. So I think we're in a very exciting phase where there's different types of innovation happening in different parts of the country, but also through different organizations or different branches of government. And I think that's all to the good.
Was there the gentleman?
Hello, thank you. John Hamilton from Gateway Qualifications. We're an awarding body who are making qualifications, thanks to employers, etc. My question is around T-levels. Are T-levels actually counterproductive to levelling up? Because if you take a young learner in 16 to 18 in Blackpool, a young learner 16 to 18 in Manchester, they will have differing opportunities in the digital marketplace. So therefore, surely that is actually counterintuitive to levelling up, because there isn't the opportunity for the learner in Blackpool to have the same opportunity as the learner due to the work placement and all such things as well. So yeah, also 5,500 learners currently. It needs to upgrade by 100% to get to the level of BTECs currently. So is there the appetite in the employer space to actually take this on, especially in those the hardest to reach areas where levelling up is most needed?
Well, no, John, those are very important questions. And I should say at the start that one of our biggest advocates for T-levels is the college in Blackpool. Bev Robinson is one of the complete cheerleaders who keeps asking me why we're not going faster. And I think that what we have to make sure of is that in creating this new qualification where, which has many strengths, one of which I believe is a serious work placement, that we have, that we're not shutting people out of the opportunity of getting it. And that's why I think your question is very important. What we found in our trailblazers, which are in a range of places across the country, some of them particularly deprived areas, is that the initial setup conversations around work placements can be quite difficult, but that's why we're deploying a lot of resource in DFE to help them happen. Once employers have done them once, it's then much easier to build on that relationship and keep them going. And some colleges are already reporting, some colleges that are now about to enter their third year of T-levels are saying that they already have their work placements lined up for year 3, which simply wasn't the case in years 1 and 2. So we do have a big challenge of step up. This is why the department's putting so much energy into it. And one of the things that does keep me awake at night is making sure that we're going to get enough work placements. However, we managed, through a lot of hard graft, and part of my officials and college leaders, we managed to get enough work placements during COVID, and that gives me hope that in normal times we'll be able to do likewise.
We do a PS. Yeah.
Yeah, Andy Forbes, Lifelong Education Commission, and very much welcome the direction of travel, but like many other people, the challenges are still out there. And I'd just like to build on what's just been said, because there is a long-term trend of employers in the UK not investing as much as some of our parallel countries in the OECD in training and development. And that T-level question just reminded me that that's part of a wider issue. What incentives can we introduce to get employers investing more in workforce development as part of this overall initiative?
Well, I imagine you saw the Chancellor's May's lecture earlier in the year, where he posed just that question. He didn't answer that question. He did pose it. I understand that he's going to start answering it in the autumn. And I, like you, very much looking forward to what he has to say.
I think we have to let the minister go now, do we? Yeah, I can see that he needs to leave the room. So could I ask you to thank him for joining us today and for taking those questions. I think, at the heart of it, you feel the energy and everyone knows that the potential is there, but we need to unleash that talent. And I think that's for the long term. So we look forward to continuing to work with you on that. Thank you so much. All right, take care. And I can't believe you started with the Roman forts. You still do that. Sorry, Anglo-Saxon. Thank you. Okay, we're now going to move on to our panel now. So could I invite up Shay Bacon from Centrepoint, Georgina Burt from Child Poverty Action Group, Richard Caulfield from the Association of Colleges, Henry Morrison from the Northern Powerhouse, and Councillor Sue Hinchcliffe from Bradford Council. I hope everyone's been mic'd up at this stage. Yeah, we actually met on a screen for the first time about a day ago. Like 36 buses. All mic'd up down there. Yeah, great. Susan, well done for being the culture capital.
Please, very pleased. You come in 2025 or before.
Well done. Yeah, it's going to be, and is that going to mean a lot for young people as well? Is your prompt there to tell us yes?
Absolutely. So the bid was led by young people, and we sent a group of 100 young people actually down to Coventry whilst it was on to see how they were doing it, and they came back fully enthused and with great great leaderly qualities actually of our young people. So yes, it's going to be for them, and it does, after 2 years of the pandemic, and I'm sure that'll come up, they've really been struggling through school and education. It will be something where they can really now start to build confidence for the future.
Yeah, great. Well, as one of the residents of the area, I'm very pleased as well. This is now where we've got a session looking at the education gaps and really hearing from the panel, which come from, you know, all different aspects of, if you like, what it will take to really ensure that opportunity is realized. And you know, I think what all the questions that we're getting, all of the discussion, everyone knows that, you know, the potential to unleash talent and to re-engineer the future of young people in the area is just immense. But, you know, I'm a realist as well. I know it's not going to happen of its own accord. So a big question for me is, what will it take? And I wanted to just start off by asking people around this table here, just in a couple of minutes each, really, what do you think it will take to realise what we're talking about here, to get to the prize? Henry, do you want to start? Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fine. And I won't steal any of Susan's thunder. I'm sure Susan will talk a bit about the opportunity area in Bradford. But that's a good place to start, because it's going to take us intervening in individual places. So as Anne's work when she was Children's Commissioner, her report on Growing Up North shows some research we did around the same sort of time that first brought us together with Anne on this agenda all those years ago. The issue is that in certain places we have large numbers of long-term disadvantaged kids. So those are kids who are on free school meals under its current definition for the whole time they're in either primary or secondary education. And we know in particular those children are the most likely to fall behind during their secondary education. So in the North East, we have some of the best primary performance historically in the country, though London is closing the gap. But it's the secondary school where those children really fall behind. And what we know is that the traditional approach of simply academising more schools in those areas, because almost all these communities have entirely academised secondary schools, is that doesn't necessarily get the job done. And we're really pleased to be seeing Right to Succeed working along with Shine and other partners in North Birkenhead, trying to fix some of these problems very similar to the efforts that Susan's made, funded by the government in Bradford and in other opportunity areas over the last few years. But the impact and the focus needs to be on particularly those white working class and black Caribbean kids who even do worse than their cohort as a whole. And because so many of our northern communities have such high concentrations of these types of young people with these types of backgrounds, we essentially have a huge concentration issue. So there is a problem in this country that the most disadvantaged children fall the furthest behind. But that particularly affects the north of England and the West Midlands, because the vast majority actually of white working class and black Caribbean kids are focused where they're in the highest concentrations in these places. And they tend to go to the same schools. And why I allude to that place-based approach is that unless you look at the whole system, not just at education, but at housing, at health, we can't address the fundamental inequalities that we know are holding children back. So as someone who kind of runs a think tank that's supposedly about the importance of agglomeration economics, this might seem a very strange presentation to be giving you, but fundamentally you cannot solve the North's macroeconomic issues around our long-term underperformance compared to South of England, unless you ensure that young people from all backgrounds are able to participate in the economy. Otherwise, the growth of cities like Manchester will bring well-educated middle-class kids from the south and other parts of the country to Manchester to take the opportunities we're creating here in the city and creating in cities like in West Yorkshire and Leeds and in Bradford. And what we want, if we are genuinely going to close the north-south divide, is the opportunities we're producing in some of our highest value sectors being open, whether it's through high quality apprenticeships or through other forms of advanced skills, to be able to go to those people who have those significant barriers. And we're doing some research at the moment that shows, and we publish shortly, that once kids even get to 25, the gaps in outcomes are terrible for those children from disadvantaged backgrounds, because they have lower social capital and they often have very little access to the adult skills system because they've been locked out. And I think maybe in the discussion we get on the little bits what we can do about adult skills, because the devolution Alex referred to here in Greater Manchester could help solve some of those problems for the young people who've already gone through that system. We need to stop it happening to those people going into the education system today, and why Anne's focus on early help and prevention and on the early years is so important. Because whether it be the early years, primary or secondary school, we need to be tackling these issues and these gaps before they widen. And in this country, we've taken money out of early years, we've taken money out of some of those disadvantaged communities, and we haven't, under this government in 12 years, spent anywhere near enough money on the most disadvantaged children in the most challenging areas. Those need to be our focus. It's not about simply spending more on education in totality, as this government talks about so often. It's about focusing that money on the kids that most need it. Because if you don't focus on the most disadvantaged, all you're doing is actually rewarding those who have access to opportunities already, rather than addressing the fundamental inequalities in our society, which all start in childhood and adolescence, and they are fundamental to making us a fairer country.
Thank you. And Susan, I mean, some of just the stats themselves are so stark, aren't they? I mean, Henry's given us that there, but disadvantage gap of 18 months before the pandemic increasing, 40% of that happens before kids even go to school. You're 3 times as likely to go to university if you're on free school meals, if you're living in parts of East London than you are in parts of the North. And of the places where most children leave without basic qualifications in the whole country, 4 are in the North. I mean, they're so stark. How do you think, how do you go about changing that? And obviously it's not something where, there's not going to be a magic fix. What's the recipe, if you like, from your point of view of changing that?
There's multiple barriers to success, isn't there, for our young people? And I think obviously we have had education opportunity in Bradford, which has been very welcome. Of 12 areas in the country, we were one of those. Yet because we're the youngest city in the country, we made up 25% of all the children on that programme nationally. So the scale of our challenge and the disadvantage is huge, actually. And what we found through working in the education opportunity area and through Born in Bradford, actually, which is a longitudinal study of all our young people over now almost a 10-year period, is that it's several things. First of all, fundamental things like glasses for classes, for example, was something that came out of Born in Bradford, which found that actually disadvantaged young people didn't necessarily have the glasses to actually be able to read. So if reading disadvantage is there, then can they actually read the board in the first place or read the books in the first place? So getting them a pair of glasses in the classroom and at home, a fundamental basic thing we can do, which actually starts to alleviate some of that disadvantage. Also, something like therapeutic support. Our young people have mental health issues, which may be brought on by poverty and disadvantage, but also, I'm afraid we have a CAMHS and mental health real demand at the moment in our system, which if it's not supported, those young people cannot succeed. So we put, as a local authority, more therapeutic support into schools. Obviously support for literacy and numeracy, reducing persistent absence actually as well. If they're not at school, they can't learn. So how do we do that? And again, that's the local authority money that's having to go into that. And then I think you move on to FE. We've mentioned FE. I think it's a really important place for us to try and catch up some of that disadvantage. But we do need the right policy levers nationally for that. Yes, it needs funding, but also there's been talk of BTECs being phased out in 2024, which is a massive mistake if we're talking about levelling up and trying to, narrow the gap of disadvantage. Not all young people are going to be ready to do T levels from the get-go. And actually, so we mentioned it earlier, can they find the work placements in that local area, especially if that £1,000 grant has now been taken away from the private sector to be able to give those work placements. So there's some unintended consequences here, I think, of different policy, which are going to entrench that disadvantage unless they listen to local leaders and devolved authorities. I'm a big fan of devolution. We've got devolution now in West Yorkshire with Mayor Tracy Brabin, and we've got that AEB budget coming down, but we need more of that. Less national initiatives, more local and regionally responsive ones that work.
Shay, you work with some of the most disadvantaged kids really in difficult times as well. We know that a lot of the the issues that kids are experiencing in school come from beyond the school gate. Also that the the home environment of the child really has an impact on their whole life chances. I mean, what's your take on this?
I think it's quite simple. If we don't close the gap in education, we're going to end up with more and more young people who need help from people like me and my organization. And that doesn't make sense to me because we don't want to exist. We want Centrepoint to be gone by 2037. And that will only happen.
Very precise.
It's very precise. and the reason we've gone for 2037 is the first time we said that was, it was last year. And we said, actually, what would it take How long do we need to abolish Centrepoint? 16 years, because that's the youngest age at which a young person can come to the organization. So we don't want to exist in 16 years' time. But if we're not going to exist in 16 years' time, that gap needs to be closed. And I think it's a fundamental error to think that the gap is just about what happens in schools. It's not just about schools. It's actually about what happens in families. That's where the problem really, really starts. If you get that wrong, then that problem spills over into schools. Kids then leave school without the right education, the right skills, and so on and so forth. And they end up, if they're lucky, with a Centrepoint who helps them to put their lives back together again. But actually, if they're not lucky, what happens is that they then go on a downward spiral. And there's a point at which they slip down the spiral so long that it's really difficult to bring them back up again. And so we can talk about boot camps and all that sort of stuff as much as we want. If someone is way down the spiral, ladies and gentlemen, boot camps won't help very much. So I'll tell you why. Because I know that roughly 30% of kids who end up in Centrepoint that I work with, roughly about 30% of them can't read or write properly. They're 16 and 17-year-olds. So actually my work with them has to start with function skills. How do you actually read? Actually, what you said, Susan, is really resonating with me about glasses. For example, young people won't tell you that I can't do it. They just find ways not to do it, right? So if you get a cohort where 30% of them can't read or write properly, they're not literate, they're not literate, that's where you're starting from. And you don't tackle that problem. They are the ones who at 25 will be way beyond the range. And then what you end up with is long-term baked unemployment that is certain in the system. And earlier this morning, we heard that unemployment is low overall when you look at the data. Actually, scratch behind that data, what you will find is that there's high unemployment in different pockets of the country. And that's where this concentration of people are. So I'm delighted that, actually, to quote Will Quains, here's what he said. He said, if we give children a quality education and a fair shot, they can and will do incredible things. He's right. The problem, yeah, is the if is, what is a fair shot? What is a fair shot? A fair shot has to start with investing in families. So I'm pleased that the government is saying, we'll put a bit more money into the supporting families program. That's great. Question is, how is that money going to be accessed? How is it going to be used? How is it going to be devolved? And is that money going to get to the right families who actually need it? What you're going to do with the money when it gets to the families? We've talked about childcare costs today, talked about glasses in the home, talked about free school meals. Actually, one of the things about free school meals, we use free school meals to judge deprivation. But there are families who sleep through that, right? They're not picked up because the kids aren't on free school meals and the poverty is just as bad. How do we actually reach those families there as well and help them with all these issues that mean that you can actually have a child who turns up at school ready to learn? Because if you don't do that, we don't solve the problem.
Thank you. Lots of thank you. Really important. Georgina, I guess you'd like your organisation not to have to exist as well, but sadly it's needed for now. 4 million children living in poverty, 75% of those whose parents are working. And that's a vast difference to how it was 20 years ago. And I don't actually think that politicians always get that bit. A lot of those parents with several jobs, there's lots of predictions, Resolution Foundation and yourselves about how that will increase over coming years. Obviously, cost of living crisis biting, and the whole issue about free school meals, which I know you've been, thank you for being so involved in that, pushing for that extra million kids who are in poverty but don't get free school meals. In the north, in particular, as Henry says, there's entrenched poverty in some areas, multi-generational, and that, for me,
is a different proposition than looking at some areas where you've got, you know, maybe Hackney or others in London. It's a different proposition. And I think the poverty rate in parts of the north, it's much higher in parts of the north than it would be in other areas. I mean, what can you see within both levelling up, but also in the education, employment and skills agenda, that what would it take to really speak to those kids that are growing up in poverty? You know, quite how, you know, how far back do we need to go?
So I think the first thing I guess to say is that actually child poverty doesn't feature in terms of levelling up or the school's white paper. And this is the fundamental challenge and issue that we've got, that any interventions, policies, strategies that we're trying to put in place through the education system to address gaps are always going to be held back unless we get to the root cause, which is the levels of child poverty that our young people are facing today. We have to support our schools and colleges better to be able to support our young people. Our schools are doing amazing things, but they can't do it all, and they shouldn't be doing it all. We need to address poverty as the root cause, rather than asking schools to address all of these different things. At present, and we've talked statistics today, but as somebody that was a teacher in a previous role, in an average classroom, in an average classroom of 30, 8 young people will be growing up in poverty. And again, in the Northeast, significantly higher than that. And we don't see that in terms of free school meals. It's not what we measure in education. It's not what we acknowledge or what's reported in education, because actually 1/3 of children that are growing up in poverty won't be getting that free school meal, therefore aren't eligible for additional types of support that come through initiatives such as the Pupil Premium. And also it makes it really difficult for schools and colleges to identify who might be in need of that additional support, because where free school meals only measures a proportion of children and young people experiencing poverty, it doesn't capture anybody, because we have an incredibly low threshold to be able to do that. And so much is tied up in free school meals. That is the go-to thing in education, but actually it's not a reliable proxy for what we're talking about. That being said, I think there are some things that we can do within our education system, and we've been running a project, a child poverty action group called the Cost of the School Day. And the first thing we've got to do is listen to our young people and children. So we've now spoken to over 5,000 young people in England to understand what school is like if you are living in a household where things are more difficult financially, what the experience of being in school is like. And what children and young people have told us is that there's not equity of opportunity and participation within our schools, because we talk about glasses, but families face costs to send their children to school here in the UK. There's uniform cost, stationery cost, ingredients for food technology lessons, instrument lessons to be able to do a music GCSE, calculated as revision guides, textbooks. And that's before we get into those additional parts of our education system that we want everybody to be able to participate in. So things like the trips and the clubs and all of those nice bits that we remember about our time at school. And this isn't a critique of schools, because like I said, schools are doing an amazing job, but I think we need to start by looking at what do we want that experience of education for all children and young people to be? What is important within our education system, and where are children missing out? Because what's really clear from speaking to young people is that children are missing out on the wonderful things our education system has to offer because of some of these barriers that they face around household income. So I think that's where the starting point.
And I guess with that as well, all of those things mean that you're not going to be able to look ahead and positively planning your future, because you literally don't have either self-confidence or the belief that the future is something that you can you know, take control of, which is so different from families in a different situation. But this is all something we can do something about, isn't it? We're talking here about problems. We can intervene. I know colleges have a particularly large number of disadvantaged kids that will come to them, and work particularly hard to try to be inclusive and support their needs and the like. Give us some hope we can do something about. But I wanted also that, you know, just this, obviously there's figures out this week from Resolution, I think, Foundation, saying that poor mental health being the biggest driver of worklessness, a growth in worklessness for 18 to 25-year-olds. Also, there's a figure in the Northeast that a third of all the people that are not working are 16 to 24s, and that's 30,000 people. You know, imagine being one of those 30,000 at that stage in your life. It's obviously not where anyone would want them to be. I'm roaming a bit on your brief here, but feel free to tackle all of that.
We took part in a round table, didn't we? Earlier
That's right. This will teach him for coming on my screen 2 days ago.
Yes,
Little did he realise.
I lead on mental health, the Association of Colleges as well. So I see on a daily basis the challenge around mental health in further education, for our young people, for the services that are there. And actually, I had that down as well. Well, I started off with 3 points. I'm up to 7 at the moment. I'm getting angrier. That's it. But you know, if we don't tackle the mental health issues, if we don't tackle, as Henry was saying, some of the wider issues, there's only so much education institutions themselves can do. And actually, just one last thing about that, you asked the colleges on that roundtable to put their hands up if they were running a food bank for their students, and 50% of the colleges put their hands up. So that's what we're seeing.
And a lot of the staff were buying the food themselves.
The staff are buying the food. And I'm going to start with, and it always feels painful to start with, we need further investment, doesn't it? 'Cause it always sounds like you're coming with a bit of a begging bowl and asking for money. But actually, we do need investment in our skills infrastructure if we're going to tackle any of the issues that we've looked at today. I think we looked at IFS reported recently that even with the government's prioritising of further education, as they would say, that by 24-25, that 16 to 18-year-old funding will be 10% lower than it was in 2010. So that's 15 years later, we're still 10% below the previous investment. And that's when the government prioritise it. So goodness knows what we do when we're not a priority. And adult education, actually, 33% less by the time we get to 2024. So real underinvestment in the system, and we will not turn it around. We have a workforce crisis at the moment, recruiting staff. And that a teacher in further education is generally paid about £9,000 less than a teacher in schools. We have a real issue with pay. If we're going to get the people to provide the training, the skills that we want our students to come out with them skills, then we're going to have to invest in that workforce. And if we don't do it, there's a problem. So I'm trying to come up with solutions, am I?
Yeah,
but yeah.
We can come on to solutions. You don't have to get it all in this bit.
And actually, I had investment, but not initiativitis. And I've heard a couple of them things sort of said today. You know, the minister talks about multiply. What we're doing landing multiply on the landscape of skills right this very second, I do not know. Yes, we need investment to help us build up numeracy, but we don't need another initiative. Let's build on what we've got, what we know that works, and everyone's trying to work out what the heck it means right this very second. Boot camps, other things, they throw initiatives at us. Give us the right investment, give us a plan like someone was saying earlier, and let's stick to that plan and work with it. We can do something. Apprenticeships, we had a good question about apprenticeships earlier. A massive need for reform there. An interesting thing that's happening at the moment that I'm getting reported to me is lots of people are getting the qualification they need, which is part of the apprenticeship. And then wages are so low for apprentices, or the opportunity to earn, they're not finishing the apprenticeship by going through an endpoint assessment. They're going out to take a further job. Actually, oddly, good for the employer in that case, because they've got the qualification. It's good for the person who's taken the apprenticeship because they've managed to progress. Actually, the provider ends up stumped for cash and quality. So actually, we've not got a skills system that's based on employer need and provider need. It's a confused system. And actually, we also heard mention of the apprenticeship levy earlier. I'm afraid to say, I don't think the levy was brought in to fund MBAs in big companies or staff that were already in jobs. I think we need to have that levy focused on the under 25s. It needs to be focused on young people. Let's stop doing that. It's not hitting where it needs to hit. Let's have a refocusing of that investment too. Let's get careers information, advice and guidance right at all ages, not just for young people. It needs getting right there. Let's get it right for adults as well. Let's think about what colleges' role could be in that. Could colleges as key anchor institutions locally play a role in that information, advice and guidance? Reskilling, fantastic. We need lots more initiatives. Lifelong loans aren't going to cut it right this very minute for people. People need money right this very minute, actually. And that's one of our challenges. People aren't going to come back to learn on the promise of jam tomorrow. They need to be able to eat the bread today, not the jam tomorrow. And we need to therefore think about, where is the money for maintenance? Where is the money to allow people to retrain, to also not be in poverty whilst they're doing that? Because I think that's going to be a problem. And one final flip comment, because a couple of speakers have had 3 Ps. I've got 1 P. And this is a flip comment, but it's a serious one in another sense. One of my principals said to me, she went, when you're speaking, can you get them to move park life? Right? She said, because it was GCSE resit day on Monday. And she said lots of our 18-year-olds came, if they came in for the exam, were slightly out of it from whatever they've been doing. But if you think there are 10,000 young people sitting GCSE maths the day after partying for a weekend, that exam could be the most important thing on their career trajectory. And we put part of our system just works completely against another bit. Now, right, it's a bit.
Could not go.
They could not go, but they marks it, they could not go. But we're not, you know, I guess if I've been working 2 years, you're right. But we've got to think about where them young people are at and what we know and what we see, you know, and we've got to think more sensibly about some of them things. You know, but it's about that broader picture. There are so many things a college can do. That college have staff parked around their borough on the morning of the exam, ready to take phone calls, to drive, pick people up and get them to get through their maths, because they know how important that qualification is. And we've got to think about how we support young people in every single way possible.
Brilliant. And it's that level of intervention, i.e. getting alongside people and actually bothering to understand their lives and bring them in, that in my view is what it takes, rather than, you know, kind of shiny stuff. So I'm going to ask the audience for a few questions here along the way, but I guess what we've heard is, you know, long-term proper infrastructure, cohesion, understanding and collaborating with those that understand communities and working communities and business in those areas, but also the ability to do it ourselves as well within all of that. Let's do, if we can go get some flavors from the audience, and then we'll come back and go around again. So, gentleman here first. Could be really brief because we've got.
Absolutely. It was really interesting to hear us go back to school in this discussion, because obviously a lot of the time people think of FE and further employment beyond that in this discussion. I'd like to go back even further and ask the panel what they think, what kind of interventions they think could be done in the early years, with recent data showing that child development's actually in decline around communication and social skills.
Yep, thank you. That was on that one.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question. During the pandemic, our industry, which is the renewable sector, saw a loss of apprenticeships in the supply chain, but continuation and growth in the developer side of its work. And those apprenticeships are incredibly competitive. We can see thousands of people applying for a handful. That loss is really impacting us. I'm interested in everything that you said in terms of the longer term history around all of this bridging the gap. We've got a shortage right now in terms of people. And I wonder if there is any thought to alternative pathways into different industries that do not just rely on apprenticeships, where very often more disadvantaged children could be missing out on opportunities just because of the competitive nature of it. And has there been any thought? I thought it was very interesting in terms of the minister. He didn't really seem to address that there had been drops in certain areas around apprenticeships. And is there any anything in sight coming down the road where we're going to see additional growth to support the future of the industry in the country?
Then this gentleman here, we'll do this as our first swoop and see how far we get on.
Thank you very much. My name is Ewan McCall and I'm from the WISE group. Last year we worked with around about 50,000 people across sort of employment, justice and fuel poverty over a course of months and sometimes years to try and improve their situation. And with that sort of huge amount of information and insight that we're gathering from this very vulnerable customer base, we found within a study in the Northeast that around about 75% of young people that we were speaking with didn't feel comfortable going into an interview situation, especially an interview situation online. And interview situations in person also had barriers around about travel, as we've mentioned, but also around about feeling as if they've not got the right clothes. They don't feel as if they're able to have clean clothes as well. So there's a huge number of people that are excluded for that reason, and also digitally as well. And I was just wondering, how are your organisations reaching young people and adults who are digitally excluded and are uncomfortable about their own situations?
Great, thank you. Can we start with you, Henry, in terms of that skills gap, but also the pathways gap? And then more from you, Susan, about, you know, from a city perspective, you know, how do you build that collaboration in schools that aren't now under the command of the local authority, with business and with opportunity? How do you grow those, Henry?
I think Mel's point's really well observed, and it's definitely the case in other sectors as well beyond renewables. I think, and I think the challenge is to what extent is the further education system being incentivised and funded to provide pathways to the jobs that exist, because often the pathways to those jobs are more expensive than the ones that we're currently prepared to fund. So the FE system in Grimsby is not incentivised financially to provide people to your industry. It's provided with the same financial settlement, with the same drivers as every other college in the country. And so our existential answer to that is you do need to give more levers to the public sector in Lincolnshire to decide to spend whatever limited post-19 funding we have, or whatever other levers we can use to get people into those sectors. And I think the kind of colonisation of apprenticeships by middle class kids, particularly degree apprenticeships, is a definite factor. And there are some things you can do to address that. So Sheffield Hallam, for all their degree apprenticeship programmes, do pre-work with disadvantaged kids to get them in a position so that when they go to the employers on those programmes, they are more likely to succeed at interview. And I think we'd be really keen to work with you, Mel, to see if we can design something similar for the sectors you work with, because I think there is a replicable model there we'd be really keen to develop with you for that situation. But I think the wider existential point is just saying that even if we could do more on levy sharing and pooling, and Alex didn't get onto that, but things you could do in the north that would benefit to grow the apprenticeship pool, they shouldn't be the only mechanism to get disadvantaged kids into higher skilled jobs. We do need to incentivise and fund the FE system to provide the courses that are needed in each location. And even if those courses have a higher cost to deliver them, we should be incentivising colleges to provide what's needed. And I don't necessarily think it's the fault of the sector. I think the reality is that they are funded to provide in essentially units of accredited learning, and they are not incentivised structurally to fund and be able to provide units that are most suited to the place they're based in. And I think that we need to be focusing a lot more on what the structural incentives are, and just having a few employer partnerships, as valuable as the work that Chambers of Commerce are currently doing, supported by government, doesn't actually move the financial incentives. It just improves the edge of the kind of links and the conversations. I think what's happening in Greater Manchester, where now the money does follow, and in other devolved areas through the AUB, and as Susan alluded to now in West Yorkshire, where the money can be directed based on the needs of the economy, rather than simply what some funding agency in London thinks is a good idea, is the right first step. But we are miles away from funding colleges based on the needs of local employers. And people in Blackpool, for instance, that were mentioned earlier, who are focusing on the digital sector, they are all doing that despite the drivers on the sector, not because of them. And the colleges that are able to make it pay do that. But I don't think in every situation, the local FE sector and the local wider provider sector is always being funded to provide the right courses for the employers in their area. And I don't think it's the fault of the employers in the area often, and I don't think it's the fault of the colleges. I think it's the fault of the fact we have a national funding system that funds courses that are the cheapest, essentially, because it wants bums on seats. And I'm not really interested in the numbers of people going through the FE system or through the wider skills system. I'm interested in how many of those people are getting into higher paid, higher skilled jobs. And as the north of England becomes more productive and we take out large numbers of lower skilled and unskilled jobs, we've got to focus on that, because otherwise we're also not going to be able to meet the government's and our own wider ambitions to enable higher skilled businesses to grow, because the current public funding system and the level of employer funding for skills, which is also beyond the levy, almost non-existent, has got to change. Otherwise, we're never going to become a more productive country, never going to become a more productive Northern England.
Susan, your local, your local area in terms of that complex nature of both learning, but also that pathway into employment.
But I think it's a real challenge. I mean, in Bradford, we've got 140,000 children and 220 schools, and therefore making sure there's a good partnership between learning providers and the business community takes time, takes partnership work. And of course, we've already heard this morning that the capacity of local authorities has been reduced to be able to do some of that work. In spite of that, actually, for us, it is a priority in Bradford, given our young population. And we have something that we fund called Industrial Centres of Excellence. And we have 86 business leaders on those boards with across 9 different sectors, working with secondary schools and colleges to shape the curriculum. And there's about 14,000 young people benefited from that, whether that's access to learning, work experience, and actually directing them into something that they enjoy and that they know about. The most successful people are the best networked, and actually providing them with that business community around them and supporting the curriculum and direct access into that school and to those learners does help them raise their aspirations and look at what's out there, so that they're actually motivated and equipped to get the opportunities they need. But that is on 14,000, they've got 140,000 children.
There's a big thing about scale, isn't
and
there?
the scaling that up and sustaining the finance of that is a real challenge. There's real willingness from the business community to participate, but they need to be able to plug and play, if you like, and that requires work for the public sector to be able to provide that plug and play. It's important.
Yeah. I'm being told to hurry up because I know lunch is ready. In terms of the question about the kind of the scaffolding that some kids might benefit from, or indeed, their parents and adults too. What is what is the best example you've seen of where that works? Briefly, because we are being moved along, I'm afraid.
I'm struggling to think of good examples. Actually, before I get into that, I want to pull into the points that Henry and Susan have been making. This point that nobody is incentivized to actually help young people have soft skills. And that is really, really critical to them actually getting on the world of work. Neither schools nor FE colleges themselves are incentivized to do that. In relation to the scaffolding issue, what I would like to see is...
Are you not incentivized? Isn't that what you do?
I really strongly disagree with what's been said about what goes on in FE colleges. And I think if you walked into a college, let me take you by the hand and take you into a college and show you what they are doing, because they are doing marvelous things. I'm not saying that some people don't get left behind in that, or some people don't access that, but colleges are doing marvelous things.
In the system, in the incentive.
Exactly. I'm not saying that some colleges are not doing this.
But the system incentivizes away from lots of what we think.
Exactly. That's the point. That is the critical point that I'm making.
But he still does have something to do with it.
Yeah. Can I just say one other thing about the scaffolding? Just going to say. This interesting thing about the money the government wants to spend on supporting families program, that's a program into which some money has been put. It will finish in 2025. Actually, they're still going to have children born in 2025. And they're still going to need help in 2026 and 27 and 28. So actually, it seems to me that a better way to tackle that scaffolding is to bring all those things into the universal credit system, and then you actually bake it into what happens long term, and it becomes something that is driven by individuals themselves, not done to individuals.
And just Georgina, on that, on the point of training work, because I really you know, I remember when, you know, there was lots of investment in childcare that was free at the point of use for parents who wanted to train. What do you have any sense that that's part of the anything like that's coming along anytime soon, or do you think it's now being divorced in people's heads?
I think we've got a challenge, as my colleague mentioned earlier, around making sure that there is childcare, that people are able to access. The question about early years, absolutely more of it. I guess I was nodding along of the question about sort of things for interviews. We hear so many different terms around poverty, so fuel poverty, clothing poverty, furniture poverty. It all comes down to the fact that people don't have enough money, and the answer to that is within our social security system and benefits themselves and universal credit offering adequate levels of support to families. That's the fundamental part that we should be looking at and advocating for, rather than lots of different add-ons and third sector organisations or having to plug gaps around suits for interviews and transport costs for interviews and small things coming through the household support fund in terms of energy support. Let's just make sure we've got a system that fundamentally provides enough for people to be able to make their own decisions and live their lives sort of autonomously.
Brilliant. We're going to have to draw to a close. I'm really sorry, but lunch is on its way. But I wanted to ask a final question. It's also warming you up for the session after lunch, which is the mayoral panel. Do you think that devolution is the way that this is going to happen properly? Or some kind of, you know, regional generated plan, program, you know, whatever you want to call it. Do you think it's going to come down to devolution in the end, or do you think that would take it down at a place that you know, would be missing out of opportunities? I'm going to ask down this end.
Yes.
Susan, I know you already. That's right. That's the length of answer I'm after.
Exactly. So devolution.
It was an easy question that
Yeah,
she'd already
absolutely.
said it, and I knew.
Yes.
Where would you have it? It can't all be devolution.
Yeah, yes, for everything but the social security system. So all the targeted intervention you do, because the one distinction I would make is that I agree that we don't have enough income going to the poorest families. That's clearly true, but I do still think there are things you can do around health and education investment in particular that would challenge the fact that unfortunately we live in one of the most unequal countries in the developed world. And even if you spent more money in the universal credit system in the coming parliament and the one after that and the one after that, you would still have structural inequalities that have been created in the last 50 years. So you're going to have targeted investment. And in Greater Manchester, Andy has targeted and set minimum standards for the most deprived neighbourhoods to have better outcomes. And that is exactly how we can do this, because the same way that Manchester was able to regenerate its city centre, the same way that the renaissance of many of our urban cities has been a great achievement in the last 20 years, addressing the inequalities in our neighbourhoods and addressing the fact that young people from different backgrounds do so differently in society is fundamentally the next big challenge for the north of England. And it is more important than trains, and it is more important than innovation. It is more important than everything else. It's more important than everything else, because if you don't do that, you can have all the investment you want in the things that Susan and I both believe so strongly. We want the people in Bradford, the people in Manchester, in Oldham, in Bury, to have the opportunities to go and do things, but they themselves need to be enabled and capable of taking advantage of the opportunities we want to create for them.
My top three is transport, skills and culture. That's what I focus on.
You've got
one out of three.
Go on.
I knew the other two, sorry.
Really briefly.
It's not the be all and end all of everything. I don't want skills 16 to 18-year-olds devolved, because I just think the complexity of doing that is way too big and it would be a mess.
Okay. Devolve.
Yes, I mean, I think Richard made a point earlier on. I think what he said was you need to meet people where they're at. And I don't see how you can do that without money.
It's not something I have a definitive answer on, other than to say I think there's big things social security I've already talked about, but what happens at a local level, what our individual multi-academy trusts do, what our individual schools do, what our individual colleges do, also make a really big difference too. So there's definitely a role for both.
Brilliant, thank you. We've come to the end of our time before lunch, I'm afraid, but thank all our panel for a brilliant discussion, really deep and rich knowledge there that's been brought to this. And thank you as well for your input. And I think, you know, we're optimists, but this room is full of warriors for what needs to happen as well. So release your inner warrior, I'd say, because, you know, we can't rely on other people getting to the point where they're going to always make this their priority. So let's do that ourselves. Thank you very much.
Go to lunch now, have a quick sandwich, and come back and see the wonderful Andy, Steve, and Tracy talking about that devolution point. We are lucky to have them, and not just here, but we are lucky to have them full stop. And, you know, God bless them. So anyway, come back, but great afternoon. We're drilling down on education, employment and skills this afternoon in your mini summits. If you haven't signed up, do that, but please just go very quickly, grab a sandwich and some sunshine, and we'll see you later. Thanks very much, panel, as well.
Yeah, I could hear the sound like we've had all think you might have some sandwiches out there for us. Yeah, that'll do. Really good stuff. Yeah, really good stuff. I'll tell you what, it might take a while, so you can include. I will ping you. I think she told me around also about I think she was going around. Yeah, you know that. Yeah, yeah. I know, I know. All right, great. Arrow, green arrow. Normal arrow. How about normal? Yeah. You go. So, yeah, I don't know what was thinking. Thank you so much.
That's what I did when I tried to
You miss something, there's always someone who cheers. Always.
That's that.
So the question is, we've solved the problem to the extent that now it's acceptable. So we can retain the some of the bond. We've got fundamentally to improve the lives of people. Successful city has to go. So now what local addressing the issues. But it doesn't mean it's the same. You need to bring differential teams to different places to achieve what might work in Paris. It's not about saying not use the same policy. Someone else might have another organisation. Unless you spend any time learning industry, and in a federal distributed system, they are naturally so our system is so broken that all those very basic needs work. But only it's something that's to be you spend it very ineffectively. Honestly, I think in this space, it's the inefficiencies. More separation. But no, nothing to see. So we're down all the time. So we're based on the train between all these. But no, I have to come see them as well. So we're very specifically not here. Yeah, I'll come back to your email. But we're not tribal, so we don't never leave. Because you also don't learn. So it's not, we're interested in what that means. We see it from the north. We are as interested in what we it's really good. I mean, just we really appreciate it. Congratulations, Brad. You said great delivering, Brad, but of course, so I used to work with in a partnership with you. So I know your people really well. You do great work and very lovely to meet you. Thanks for taking the time to come. Brave organisation. Many more people more interested in the problem they're trying to solve rather than their own organisation's existence. I used to work in the charity sector. It used to frustrate the hell out of me. I was like,
why are we so preoccupied with our own existence and not with our service users and why we're here? Like, why are we so much fun with it? Yeah, why are we so focused on our own existence? It's a pretty good way to position it. We are also like that. We want to come out. We're really here to raise all the problems. Once we've done that, we'll go away. We've given ourselves to 2050. I've got another 27 years of employment, and then I'm unemployed in 27 years. So I'll be done. I'll be ready to retire. I'll be about ready to retire. Thanks so much for all your work. Hi Tracy.
Together, aren't we?
So well, the increase of growth history. We want to do a lot of history. And I suppose
he's going to do that. He's going to have
you painting? I can't work out. It sounds like the weirdest opening, didn't that? It looked like Louis, I think you've grabbed some aprons. I didn't pick them up. The bloody home cinema stuff here. Yeah, no way. Right. Okay. There we are. Everything's going well. That's going really well.
Okay, so no lessons, okay?
Well, you know, there's a painting lesson.
Okay, so nobody has no reason. Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying. But you just do that, but it's not like it's not it's meant to be just conversational. But it's all been very good, and it's all been very conversational. So it's short-ish session, but so we can get as much as we can out. So, yeah. What then you are asking is that's a general question. So, yeah. So it's just there. I need to read that because I think I'm actually in conversation with young people for marriage. Oh, that's fine. Yeah, that question about what more powers. That's a really time you're thinking about with young people. Well, it's from your point of view. What I'm trying to get there. The point of the question is, do more. Actually have got powers. You know, we've got great opportunities. I'm sure it was all right. To be a little bit sort of busy and compressing, whereas that is just as it's straight into the. These are the opportunities. How do you no, post-pandemic, we've got a really skilled lady in pockets or West Yorkshire, Red Manchester, whatever. Skills. And what we've been talking to this, we've done the economy and growth, we've done education, but this is a generation gap. This is tomorrow's generation looking at how we actually make that work. So skills. Yes. Okay, that's fine. So we've got whether it's focused on skills. Whether it's net zero or whatever, and to get growth, we need those opportunities. Like I could get to make sure people get the education. And then into the skills. I know you have got it. Because I've heard you.
No, it's just when you said about what more powers do we want.
Yeah,
and bridging the gap.
Yeah.
That's slightly disconnected, but I know I've got this.
Yeah, so that's a bit like rather than sort of it's about listening to that they'll say we do have a situation where we've got lots of jobs not necessarily in the right places or in the right sectors, but we have a really hot equally there are other sectors where we just have skills to build with. Some of it's the pandemic, a lot of it people retiring early, people doing things, people are saying
getting all American for perfect team.
all these sort of things that are going on.
Sure thing.
Yeah, good. So grab a sandwich and all of those But yeah, no, I'm really pleased, and the Northern Culture stuff as well. So we launched our new inquiry the other day, the APPG, into the cultural value of sport. So that's been really interesting as well. So getting involved in that.
Great. In fact, I've got a couple of great people on my culture committee.
Yeah.
Bolu, who leads on getting girls into rugby.
Oh,
He's
right.
a Nigerian
Yeah.
international, rugby international,
Great.
working in Spain.
Yeah.
And we've got Halima, who works with street games.
Oh yeah, no, they were there. They came.
But if you were looking
yeah.
for diverse voices,
Yeah.
those two are really strong.
They came on the
speakers.
session the other day, but I'm quite keen to, you know, it's that whole taking it from that culture is really part of this.
You know, if you went to the
levelling up equal children, disparities, whatever. It's a big part. Culture is so important.
Down there.
The economy,
down
health and well-being.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Equal opportunity, all those things.
Yeah.
You go in the winner. You go in the middle.
I just think break it up. This is my usual position between Andy and Steve. Bring the two men up, you know. They're so pleased that I actually can be show a bit of diversity amongst the bears.
And Huddersfield is university they're supporting
Oh, great. Okay, yeah. But if you could feedback the outcomes from the sport, because my culture committee has got sport as well attached to it. You know, we've got 12 million that we're spending on culture in West Yorkshire, and the rolling years of 2023, Kirklees Year of Music, Calderdale Year of Culture, Wakefield Year of Culture, and then Bradford 2025. We're developing like a cultural crucible. That actually we're in a unique position that no other region is, with all the years of culture, the opportunity for the talent pipeline, and the interest from the mayoralty. So it's quite unique.
So I'll definitely get
So it was all very
space on that.
Great stuff.
What's your name? I'm Anna.
Anna is absolutely brilliant. She's just joined. She's joined from Manchester. So Manchester Combined Authority coaching.
My daughter-in-law, they've got a very small shoe shop in Notting Hill. That she runs. It's really nice, you know. It's kids shoes. Yeah. But she's an entrepreneur. She's just on it. Get involved in separate little businesses.
We need to find somebody that can try and
the idea was
yeah, exactly.
So she
I
got
knew
it
that
have to
through.
bring
She went and a cup of tea.
So she
Great, thank you, Anna.
All these got the other thing. You know, costumes and cleaning them all up.
Oh, right, okay. Whereabouts?
An all-day breakfast sandwich. Changing the colour. 3-day breakfast. And a mum started selling it.
So he's gone up to the other. Far up there. To the right. He's gone up to the other side.
She started when she was 7.
He's gone set up in the other room now.
Just 7. You know, she's just about 9. She's got a little business. And people buy this in the shop once.
I
And
can see
a
my
half.
glass.
Because she's got a picture.
Oh, God, saved my life. Thank you. No, don't worry, because that's what I was
And
saying.
she's
When that
just
came to
become
life, I
this.
didn't know.
She was always a bright girl. She was white as a pig. And she's just really awesome.
Here they are.
I can see you now. I see you now.
For my mother. My son.
All the stuff.
Had it, he had a tough life because of her. Yeah. Because of that. And I think he's a quiet, you know, so he's not, he doesn't like to put himself out there, because of that.
You know, yeah.
I'm a little concerned about
And it's fascinating to see, you know, it's a parent thing, because
yeah, but
they train their children in that.
Shall I go and get you a tea and bring it back to me? Actually, I'll look over it.
It's really interesting.
Leave my bag here. Can I assume you're going to? Yes, I'll leave my.
what did I say? What he's after? Debrief. I think we should have a debrief.
She started plugging second hand.
What's that?
To buy them online, leave them, turn them around, sell them, like a little Go on then. I first stopped them. And they're not taking any money. They're bringing in real money.
Give me all your phone.
And it's a tiny little place and it's
Working well then.
and people travel to go and buy pictures. It's not special. She sells some stuff from Holland. She sells kids' own boots and all that. So it's not that niche, but people go there because
Yeah, we can leave the van where it is loaded.
massive, massive.
What did I say?
But the rent's massive and their stocks
We like,
incredible.
we like it.
So,
Scott, sensible.
you know, they're-
I don't Gareth on the
That's
palace
a
roof painting.
different way of bringing children up.
What are you doing today?
You know, and it's
Chilling out, painting windows.
It's interesting because you would assume that when the military would spend, and it's not.
You got to see the
It's
pieces
really
they
quite
make.
quiet, quite reserved.
Well nice. Well nice.
But it's interesting. We talk about this the other night. Because the nurse
I don't know now.
day, eating everything, done this, done that. Yeah, kids come up to
It's like a perfect child.
literally, I think if they've done it any night, they would actually take her to bit of fake child. Didn't retaliate at all. Cried a bit and I was like, oh my, right, that's how it can mean it if he falls over. We don't go, he'll get up, get on with it.
And that's like, well, that's what it is, you see.
And that is what I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Because he has no fear, and we're not honest. But,
Meant to pause.
I said to him, you know what actually does is maybe he lives his life around it. So when there's an element of flexibility,
That's doing out loud. Yeah, we're still
we try our hardest to switch it. But if it goes off the scale,
So, go down. We're thinking about 10 to 3 then, before we get over there.
And that's what any
Just
child
in there.
psychologist tells you about the way to develop a child is having that routine that is constant,
And does it work?
consistent.
And you're
And it's
thinking
about
about
that
that,
consistency
Mine's
as
about
well,
4:30
in
mine.
the way
Does
you
it work once you've done
chastise,
that?
the way you praise, the way you develop, and lots of people do.
Yeah, yeah, get it.
We are not a good nation.
I'll wait in the back.
We've got loads of friends
Two gamma rays
in Finland because we go there every year, at least once a year. You know, say friends, you know, they're people we've kept into each other and all that. And we ski with them, we go back, you know, we'll all, you know, 3 or 4 families, we'll sort of meet at the ski resort, and we try and coordinate it. So
What was that video you?
And seeing their
I didn't see the
children.
end of it. You said it's similar sets or that.
It's a pleasure. They are independent. It's fascinating.
Doing the
Things
Easter
like, for instance, they put the child down to sleep, like we do, put the baby in a pram outside in -20.
Whatever it's called
All
today.
wrapped up, but in the
Look
fresh
good.
air, and the baby has a solid 2-hour weekly sleep. There's kids spend
Was it set up in front of the stage? So they're on the floor?
They start their lives in outdoor nurseries or schools and all that kind of thing. There's no such thing as an indoor nursery in Finland. Don't start school at 7.
Oh, I know it.
School already prepared to learn because of that school experience.
Doing that.
School is a pleasure, which is integrated between curriculum and outdoor.
He's next door.
Yeah,
I'm seeing it, yeah. It's like Millionaire's Row. So the house next door to it, the baby's moved down.
Things like that, you know.
So he just bought it to work, so he can go to work there.
He's making it like a gaming house. So then he can have his house and they don't crack jokes and all that, but they're very happy.
Yeah,
very
this bit does look
yeah.
lovely. They seem to be using the central bit, but it's too much depth there.
You know,
and
you'll
it's
sit
not
down
like
for lunch at the
exterior.
stadium, you know, you see all the brick kids driving the wall, and mother will just go, sit, everybody sits down,
We did a wedding
have
result,
lunch,
speaking
eat
now.
it all, and then, no
Remember Jodie
children,
Conroy?
eat it all, and then it's,
Yeah.
and
That's
they go out, and they've got families.
Yeah.
And the same as
Yeah.
England, dinner.
But son's got
Son's
a bit.
got dinner, and then the kids will go out and have an hour's sledging or snow, you know, sledging and all that.
Issue is he's got no
Because
life.
you can't, you know, it's the same country, it's got, and you look at it, hence my desire to go and live in Sweden.
So the main thing is not to be nervous, right? Treat them. Everybody's just ordinary people like Tracy. Look at this. How are you? This is the action bit. The real thing. Tracy Raymond.
So we're just expecting loads of questions. Yeah, good. Where are you from?
We go down on the, unless it's a conference. I normally go down.
It looks like you're both separate. This is not right. You need to come together. You need to come together.
Yeah, all together.
And I think, you know, that's exactly what I thought. I thought you'd be telling me about shop arrangements. Is a conversation. You know, we just want to hear from you. I'm really just wondering how much your
Well, there's lots of other people who I think share, but they're not. There are others, but these are 1, 2, 3 are the ones that are on your in the kitchen. And your name is Hasia. Hasia. Your name is you've done that one. Rory, right? And Connor. So those are the 3. I'm going to get Rob.
I've just sent him a text, so he'll be here soon.
So he can get
So what's taking you to Wakefield?
It's you. What's
I need to find her, you know, as well. I only told her about it.
And so many people have no memory of what happened or they keep repeating the same mistake. Something like that. So, thank you.
Just checking you guys know about the thing in Cinema 5 where they've got the booking. Yes. Yes, it's got to be out quick. I know. Frankly, I'm going to tell her to finish it. Okay, they're going to and it's the filming there starts at 3:15, so yeah. It's finished at 3:03. So I'll do that, but if it overruns like that's we'll take that back. Oh, the water in it. I'll just leave that one there. That one's alright. You had your lunch yet? Oh, yeah, I know. There is more. Actually going back. Yeah, basically we ordered 100 sandwiches. We didn't tell us that one sandwich counted as about a quarter of a sandwich. So we're not very happy with it. Sometimes
And Wakefield will find out that there's no trains. So it really relies on its buses. So when you get there, get a bus pass. Immediately. And Rory, what do you think? Oh, so you're in the midst of it? Yeah. How do you find time to come here? Just a break. I wish I could do a bit. And I think if you grid out the time, make sure you get some downtime in a grid and make sure you allocate it the time for me. Yeah, because it can just run on. And if you think, I have to do it in an hour,
That was the best one. That curry was too hot for everyone, so I had a bowl of curry.
Before I became a politician, I was a writer, and I found that when I had kids in school, I was furious because I knew that 3:15 I had to finish because I was going to school. So actually, you have a sat at your desk, you focus, you don't listen to the radio, you know, actually just focus on what you're doing.
Oh, you're there.
Okay, what are you doing? And so who's your local MP?
Oh, sorry. No, I just thought I'd come in here. I was looking around.
I was thinking, if you don't mind, if you could do it from here.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And they're the three you're going to come to, but also you may well be killed. And your name is Brandon, remember Brandon, the call where I was apologies about this. And your name is amazing, thank you. So again, the way it's worked, if you've walked in earlier, it's all
I've also had one from Professor Katie Shaw.
Up against
Yeah, she's I think it's she's been harassing as well. Not harassing, but not harassing, but you know, just making sure we can get it done. Amazing. I'm sorry about that.
Tracy, how are you? Nice to see you too.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you going? It's a perfect match then. It is very warm. Yeah.